Hi, I'm Sjoerd de Jong, also known as Hourences, and I've been working with Unreal technology for over 10 years. In this intro to the Unreal Development Kit training video, I will introduce you to the editor by building the level you are currently seeing. We'll build this level step by step, starting at the very beginning, and we will work all the way towards the finished level. We'll cover brush building, static meshes, lighting, we will create 2 pools of water, the sky, and surrounding landscape, and we will animate and set up a door. I will also introduce you to a good and fluent workflow in Unreal Editor, as we're going to build this level from scratch, and I will give you many tips and tricks along the way. Hi, and welcome to this E3D training video, an introduction to the Unreal Development Kit. I am Sjoerd de Jong, I'm also known as Hourences, and in this video I will introduce you to the Unreal Engine 3 editor, and I will guide you through the process of building a small but pretty level. I'm going to show you the level first. This may look very complicated, but it isn't really all that complicated. We will take it step by step, and we will learn the editor through practical use. I can talk a little about myself. I started in '99 with making levels for Unreal and Unreal Tournament 1, just as a hobby, and I got my first industry job in February 2003, and since then I've worked for Guerrilla Games on the first Killzone and Shellshock, for Keon Games on the Unreal Engine MMORPG Spellborn, and for Starbreeze on a yet unannounced EA game. I've also done a lot of freelance work through the years. I was a freelance level designer for Epic Games on Unreal Tournament 2004. I did freelance work for Digital Extremes on the Unreal Engine game Warpath, and I did a lot of freelance level design work for the Unreal Engine MMO FPS Huxley. Furthermore, I also wrote 2 books, The Hows and the Whys of the Games Industry and The Hows and the Whys of Level Design, and I go by schools and studios where I give workshops in Unreal technology. I made about 5 or so Unreal Engine games in my career, and this is the 11th year that I'm working with Unreal technology. I really love the technology. So the level you're seeing, I built this in about 2 days, and the majority of that time was spent on figuring out the proportions and figuring out the architecture and all that, and making a couple of new assets. And in this video we're going to build this entire level in just a few hours, and that's the power of Unreal. Unreal gives you the ability to do a lot of stuff in a short amount of time. It gives you a lot of control and a lot of power, and that's really cool. So let's get going. I'm going to restore the view as to how it was the first time you started up. It should look something like this. You can close this window, you don't really need it right now. There we go. I always work in a maximized viewport. You don't have to do this, but this is how I work, so I'm going to maximize the viewport now. There we go. And we can start off with navigation in the viewport. The original way of moving in the viewport is to simply left click and drag to move forward and backwards, like this. Right click and drag to look around, like this. And if you hold both mouse buttons at the same time and drag, you can move up or down and left and right, panning basically. So the combination of all of this allows you to fly around. However, in the newest versions of the Unreal Engine, like the UDK, you can now also hold down the right mouse button, like this, so you can look around, and then press WASD, so standard FPS controls, to move around. So that may be easier for you. Doesn't really matter what you use, both work just fine. The red thing in the middle you see, that's the red builder brush. And that thing is always there. You can't delete it, you can't duplicate it, it's always there. It creates brushes, but it isn't really a visual brush by itself. You can't see this in game, it doesn't really exist just in the editor. And on the left side you have all these geometric shapes, primitives. If you click them, the red brush changes shape. Most of these are remnants of Unreal 1. For example, this one. This was used in the first Unreal Engine to make fire and such. You had 2 planes intersecting each other, and then you put an animated flame texture on both planes, and that's it. Obviously, in 2010, you don't make fire with this kind of system anymore. So you can forget about this one, and the same for this and this. And pretty much all of them, I never actually use any of these but the cube, and rarely also the staircase. That's it. So most of these are pretty outdated and pretty unused nowadays. So stick to the cube. If you right click it, there we go, then you get a dialog box and you can enter the size. So for the level we're going to make, it's best if you enter the size of 3200 wide and 2688 on X. So X 2688, Y 3200, and Z doesn't really matter. This is the height, something like 2048 for now. And you get a much bigger cube. A player is 90 to 96 units high, so this is a fairly large cube. Now to add this brush to the world, you can click on Add. So on the left side, over here, you have a CSG Add. That's that one you click. And there we go. If this doesn't look like this blue textured cube in your computer, then it may be that it looks like this or like anything like that. So you can play with these viewport buttons at the top of every viewport. Got those everywhere, as you can see. And you can. It could be that, for example, you're in lit mode, and since there's no light yet, it's obviously pitch black. So if you were to switch to unlit mode, you can see the texturing. Could also be that you're in this mode, and this is wireframe view, and so you can play around and look at what all of them do. But I'm using unlit right now. If you don't see anything at all, if it looks like this, even when in unlit mode, it could be that you press Q on the keyboard, because Q on the keyboard is hiding and unhiding brush surfaces. In general, if there's something you can't see in the viewport, like something is hidden for some reason, you can always go to the little drop-down menu over here, Show, Use Defaults, and then you go back to the default settings. This is going to be the floor of our level. So we'll have the tower, something like over here. And then the rocks on the left side and right side, and the whole valley in front of it. We're going to leave brushes alone for now. So I'm not going to do anything more with brushes for now. We're first going to focus on static meshes, and we're going to use those to, can take the screenshot, to create the bulk of the building. So about 90% of the building is made with meshes, and the remaining 10% is done with brushes. Right, so we're going to start off with doing the meshes first, because that's the bulk of the building. And then after that, after the first pass of meshes, we'll come back to brushes, and we'll go a little bit more in depth with brushes. To place meshes, the first thing you should do is to open the content browser. So the top menu you have on the right of the binoculars, on the left of the green K, you have Open Content Browser. And then you get this window. This is the same window as your start window. See, this is what you start with. If you go to the left, all the way to the left, you have Content Browser. It's a tab. And this is where all the content, all the materials, all the textures, all the sounds, all the particles, etc. are located. It's like an asset collection. You can close down a couple of these panels. For example, if you click on this button, you lose this panel. You can click on this one to collapse this, etc. Basically, the only parts I use are the packages and the filter on top and the actual content browsing area. You can expand UT game, and let's restore it. And then you can expand environments, and these are all the packages for environment creation. You can select one, and then you can see the content of each. The green ones, these are materials, as it says so. These are static meshes, the blue ones. So we will start off with these. These are just modals. You can double click one, and you can see it's a little bit bigger. You rotate and you navigate this viewport in the same way as you navigate your real viewport. Kind of click and drag. We're going to start off with the roof of the building. So we'll start off with the roof, because it's one gigantic big mesh, and it's a really big mesh. It's good. It gives a good sense of proportion, and it's a good big piece to start with. And once we got that done, we'll move on to making one entire tower. We'll start off at the bottom, and then we'll work our way up. So let's start with the roof. We're going to be working largely with the neck packages. So neck, all of these. If you want, you can click the first one, hold shift on the keyboard, and click the last one, and you will get all of them. You can also use the filter at the top, so you can select static meshes here if you want to, and it will only show static meshes. The roof we're going to use is in neck_buildings, and it's this one. No, sorry, this one. Big mesh. It's called Turk Roof 3set02. Hold it selected. Got it selected. Move the window a little bit out of the way, and simply click and drag it into the scene. There we go. It's too big. We want to scale it. So at the bottom you have these 4 boxes, 4 times a 1. This is general scale. So if I raise this, it gets much bigger. And the other 2 are the scales per axis. So this is the x-axis. We want to scale it down because it's too big. So we're going to scale down the entire model to 0.75. And then we can move it. We can move it with these. You can also move it by holding Ctrl on the keyboard, and while holding Ctrl you click and drag the mouse. Depending on which mouse button you press and hold, it moves in a different direction. So the left button is X, right is Y, and both of them at the same time are up and down, Z. You can also hold Ctrl Shift, and in that case the camera will move along with objects, which is quite handy. So it doesn't really matter which one you use, all of it works. Move the roof up in the air, and like this. Try to guess where the roof will be later on. So I'm imagining that this is tower 1, tower 2, and the middle piece. Should be about this height, I think. And also note that I placed it on the long side. This side is a little longer than this side. So I placed the roof on the long side, and the building will be on the long side, not on the short side. Okay, and then we can start with the tower itself. The tower itself is actually made up of a lot of different meshes, and it's a bit unique to Unreal. You don't model the entire thing in a modeling package. Well, you could do it, Unreal supports it, but usually you end up using many different small modular static meshes and combining and scaling them in such a way that you get something new. So it's kind of like Legos. You get a lot of different, usually simple blocks, simple meshes, but it's about the way you combine them that makes something cool or not cool, and that gives you something new. So in this case, the tower, this is one mesh, it's another mesh on that side. This is one mesh, that mesh copied around to continue the rest of the circle. Same for this, 1, 2, 3, 4. One pillar is a mesh, so 1 pillar, 2 pillar, 3 pillar, etc. on the other side. Every window is a separate mesh. This ring is a separate mesh, and another ring on the other side, etc. So yeah, this whole thing is about 40 to 50 static meshes. It's made up of 40 to 50 different parts. And we're going to start at the bottom. So you can go back to the content browser, and then you can go to see where it would be. I think trims. Yeah, you can go to neck_trims, and here we want to start off with the lowest ring, which is this one. Looks like this. It's a big ring, pretty simple one actually. It's called plane cure A. Again, you move it out of the way and you drag it into the scene. It's really small, as you can see, so you want to scale it up. It should be scaled according to my notes, because I already built the building once, so I already know the scale of everything. Normally when you start a new level you will have to experiment a little and find the right scale. In this case I know how big every element should be. This should be 2.75 for the general scale, like this, and it should be 1.5 high, because it's quite a vertical building we're going to build. And to cover a height, to cover this much height, we would need to have a lot of different meshes to cover it up. Or what I'm doing is I'm going to scale every mesh a little bit, so the combined result of all these scaled meshes is higher than usual. Right? I can't scale this too much. If I scale this like 4, you're going to see that it's really ugly. So I can't do this. I have to scale it. 1.5 is usually about the maximum you can do, because beyond 1.5 it gets obvious that it's scaled up. This is getting obvious. So I'm going for 1.5, kind of the maximum, and work with that. We can move it. So again, we're moving it, and it's 1/4 of a circle. We want to make a 180-degree circle, so we're going to have to duplicate this. You can duplicate various ways. We'll start off with the most obvious way. We can simply do Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V. There we go. So this is the easiest way, and we'll get back to the other ones later on for the other pieces. Then you want to rotate it, like I just did. So if you press spacebar, you toggle between the 3 modes. So move, rotate, and scale. So if you press it once, you go to rotation, and then it's just a matter of clicking and dragging the right circle, just like in any 3D program. And you line them up like this. Make sure they line up nicely. You don't want to have a seam, you know what I mean? You don't want to have this. This would be pretty bad. And you obviously don't want to have this either. This is pretty bad as well. So nicely line them up. They should snap to each other. So it should be good. A little seam in between, but no one will notice that. You can select both of them. So you hold Ctrl and you just click. Then you can select multiple meshes or multiple of anything. And you just move it to about below the roof. You just kind of guess where it is. We'll have to move the roof later on anyway, so it doesn't really matter right now. Just have something to start with. There we go. And then the next ring. So we go back to the content browser and we're looking for this one. So a pretty heavily decorated piece. Also a big curve, has blue on the top and bottom. And it's called Vented 03D. So make sure it's this one. It's not this one. This is an inner curve. And we're looking for the outer curve, like this. So we can select it. Last 2 times we clicked and dragged it in. We don't have to do that. There is another way to add meshes. You can also have it selected in the content browser. And then right click somewhere in the world. Have to make sure it fits the resolution. Right click somewhere in the world. And you can go to Add Actor, Add Static Mesh. So this one is a currently selected mesh in the content browser. And if I click this, I also get the mesh. This one too should be scaled. And it should be scaled to 2.5 general. And it should also be 1.5 high. I will get back to these numbers much later on when we talk about modular meshes. And I will tell you why we want to go for numbers like 2.5 or 2.25 or 2.125 and why we can't just do 2.3. So, but we'll get back to that later. For now, just use the numbers I tell you. If you look at the screenshot, this is actually the other way around. So it is supposed to be rotated. Let's do that first. You press spacebar once, and then you just rotate it like this. And you place it on top of the other ring. It can stick in. It doesn't. In this case, it doesn't matter. But it can be like this. Sticks in. There's no problem with doing this. It also doesn't hurt performance to have meshes that stick into other meshes. It doesn't really matter in this case. It's only for meshes that have to neatly line up like these, or for meshes that have overlapping faces. that should line up nicely. In this case, it just sticks in and it's fine. When rotating things, you can also look at the bottom down here, and you will see that it shows the rotation. So we'll show you how much you've rotated the mesh. The resolution is a bit too small, so the text is cut off, but if you were to do this on a high resolution, look, I can see it on this one. So it's minus 33.75 degrees rotated now, by 45, etc. And now it's 90s. So this is an easy thing you can use while working. So can you line the two up like this? There's a little hole in between, so I haven't rotated it entirely, apparently. Fixed. And then you want to place it somewhere like, well, let's say like this. Doesn't really matter, this is a bit ugly. The building is going to stick through and you won't see this entire part. Next we're going to add another ring on top. It's the same ring as this one. So we select the lower two rings and we're going to duplicate them. And the last time we did Ctrl C and Ctrl V. But this time, however, we can also do top menu, edit, duplicate. And then we move it up and back. And we scale it to 2.375, I believe. We line the two pieces up again. And then we put it on top of the other one. Try to place it in the middle. If you find it easier, you can also work with a top-down view. And verify there. In this case, it's in the middle. You control the side views the same way. You click and you drag and it just moves. And if you use a zoom wheel, you zoom in and out. And then we're going to add another one of these rings. So we'll have to duplicate this again. Last time we did add a duplicate. But we can, however, also do Ctrl W. And that's the shortcut for duplicate. That's also an option. This new ring should be 2.25 instead, so we're making every ring a little bit smaller. And then you position it on top of the last one. You can know if it's in the middle if this distance is the same as this distance, and it's not, so it's not in the middle. So this is the same as this in this case, I think. Doesn't have to be exact, maybe it's 1 unit off or something, but no one will notice 1 unit. And you can see that this distance is not the same as this, so it should be moved back a little as well. There we go. These are some visual guidelines I use all the time when building things. We have this covered now. Now we're going to work on the windows and the pillars. So this is made up of 2 meshes, 1 pillar and 1 window mesh. So we're going to get both meshes first. We go to the content browser and we find ourselves the pillar. So go to neck_pillars. And let's see, I think I'm using this one. Yes, so I'm using this one. It's called CA sub 1. And it's a very simple square pillar. And I believe it's the only one in the package. Looks like that. Because these are all round. So I'm using the last one, this one. Add this one to the world. And then get the windows. They're in neck windows. And it's the third one. So it's Windows Slim 1. And we're adding this one as well. They're much too small, as you can see. So we'll have to scale those. The window should be scaled to 2.5 for the general scale. 1.25 for X. So they're a bit wider, and they should also be 1.25 high, like that. And the pillars, they should be scaled to 2. It's important that you type in the numbers yourself, so you can't use just the scale mode. So if you press spacebar twice, you get the scale mode. But this usually gives a bit of messy results. I can show you. I can do something like this, but as you can see, you get this really weird numbers now. 3183, I mean, it's really weird stuff, and it doesn't really make it easy to work with later on. I mean, if you want to adjust things later on, it gets difficult. So I normally don't use this mode, and I manually type in everything, so I have maximum control over what happens. Deleting that one. And now we're going to rotate these around in sets, so we can make a circle with one pillar, one window, etc. So we'll start off in the middle. That's the easiest. Rotating the window, spacebar once, and then rotating it. I can also do a quick rotate. Instead of using my mouse hovering over the circle and dragging, I can also hold on Control on the keyboard and just right click to rotate it. Right click, drag. Goes a bit faster. I position the window roughly like this. So in the middle, you can see the seam between the two meshes, so this must be in the middle. So I position the red one roughly in the middle. Roughly, doesn't have to be super exact. And I make sure there's about this space in between the two parts. Definitely not a hole in between. This would be bad. So something like this. And then I take the pillar and I place the pillar next to it. I push it inside the window a little bit and I rotate it. So I rotate it so it's roughly following this curve. Roughly. So it should be something like this, I think. Move it up a little bit, I think. Seems a bit too small. Yeah, there should be 2.5 general scale. There we go, and then it works. It's about exactly the same height. Can be slightly off, it doesn't matter this much. And then we select both of them, and we copy both of them. So I'm doing Ctrl W, duplicating them, rotating both of them, and I keep on doing this for a while until I've made an entire curve. So you try to make sure that the distance between this pillar and the edge is about the same distance over here. And you just try to visually guess the right distances and right angles. Then we want to do the same thing on the other side. And done. Next up, we're going to select all of it. So we're going to select the ring it stands on, the windows and the pillars are based on, and all the windows and all the pillars. So we hold down Control on the keyboard and we click all of it to select all the parts. While holding Control, be careful not to drag, because if you drag now, you will actually move the meshes. So be careful not to drag, but really let go of the mouse, then move the mouse, then click. And if you're going to move around, fly around, be sure to first let go of Control, because otherwise you will move everything. So I have everything selected now, and now I'm going to duplicate the entire part up to make the second group of windows. We did Ctrl C already, we did Ctrl C and V, and we did Ctrl W already. We did duplicate in the menu, but there's another way to duplicate things, and that is to hold down the Alt key, and while holding it, click and drag one of the axes. So I'm clicking and dragging the upper one, and because I hold down Alt, it's duplicating the entire set. So that's also something you can do. You place it on top. It's a small hole in between, so fixed. And there you go, we have a double set of windows. The roof is a bit too low apparently, so moving it up a bit more. Going to maybe it's a good idea to save the level now. So I'm going to press save. The window is a bit big for the resolution of the video. There we go, and then you can just enter a name. So I would name it that much DM, and then the name, something, doesn't really matter. It's the DM in front of it determines the game type. So if you want this to play as that much, you should start the level with DM, and now we can just save in the future. And then we'll move on to the connection to the roof. And again, we need a couple of rings for that. So there's one more ring at the top, and then there's a bit of a special ring, and another special ring, and then the roof comes. So 3 rings of meshes. You can select the ring in the middle of the 2 groups of windows and duplicate it. So I'm holding down Alt, dragging it up, placing it on top. So that's ring 1. Secondly, I'm using these 2 again on top. So I'm selecting these 2 special ones and clicking and dragging them up. So I held down Alt and I drag them up. But we want to mirror them. So that's something new. You can right click 2 meshes and then you can do a transform, mirror on Z. And they're mirrored. And we should scale them. Should scale them to 2.125. You can also see that the x-axis went to a -1. This minus is because we scaled it. So if you scale a mesh, I can show you with this one as example. If you were to go for -1.25, it would be mirrored down. So mirroring is as simple as simply making a value negative. So aligning the two pieces doesn't have to be super exact. And then I actually pushed it in quite a lot. I actually did it like this, because this was too much. So I just pushed the mesh in, and then we'll move on to the next ring. Go back to the content browser and go to, I think, trims again, neck_trims, and we're going to use, actually this one is even better. We're going to use this one. So slope curve A looks like this, heavily decorated, big curve. There's a last way of placing meshes. So we've done all kinds of things. We dragged it in, we right-clicked, add mesh, etc. But you can also hold down the S key on the keyboard, S from static mesh. And I'm holding it right now. And everywhere where you click while holding it, the mesh appears. So this is definitely the fastest way to doing this. And that should be scaled to 2. So general scale 2. And then place it on top. Duplicating it, rotating it, lining it up, placing it in the middle, kind of. You can see the line nicely follows the line, so it's definitely in the middle. It's good. And then we can place the roof on top. Placing the roof like this, so pushed below a little bit, and there we go, one tower done. We can now select all of this and duplicate it to the other side. It's best if you do this in a 2D window, because it would be pretty bad to go select everything like this. I mean, it would take quite a lot of time. So we can do this in a faster way. If you go to a 2D viewport, for example, the top-down viewport, I'm gonna move the red brush away, kind of in the way, moving it somewhere like this. And if you hold Ctrl and Alt on the keyboard and just left click and drag, you get a selection frame. Okay. So Ctrl Alt and drag. You can do this in any 2D viewport, but however you can't do this in a 3D viewport. So in a 2D viewport, top down, Ctrl Alt and drag, and I select the parts I need. Basically almost everything in this case. There we go. I deselect a couple of ones I selected, like the brush. So I hold Ctrl on the keyboard and I click it again to deselect it, also the roof, and we end up with the entire tower. I'm holding down Alt on the keyboard and I click and drag, and I duplicate the entire tower. We're going to start building the middle section. So we'll forget about the door for now, and we will first focus on these windows and the whole frame to the top. So we'll start off with these windows and these pillars, and there are two tiny kind of weird statues on top. There's another ring on top. We'll start with that, and after that we'll move on to the other parts. Content browser. We need to have the long windows. And again, it's the same mesh. I use this one, same one from the other ones. So I'm gonna place that one, moving it up. It's way too small, so it should be scaled to 2.5 general, so 2.5 general scale, 1.25 wide again, and it should be 1.1875 high. So it's a bit of a special number. Again, I will explain these numbers later on, but the number should be 1.1875 high. And next up, we have pillars around it. So if you look at the screenshot, there's a pillar here. Actually, I have two of these windows, and there's a pillar here, and there's a special arch mesh around it, and there's a second type of arch above it. The small arch mesh in the middle of the two, and another window in this space. So we'll start off with the 2 pillars at the bottom and then move on to the bigger arch. The pillars at the bottom are in neck pillars, I think, or in walls. And we're looking for this one. So it's very similar to the one you used on the tower. However, this one doesn't have a backside. The ones you used on the tower were an entire 3D square pillar. This one is more like a corner. And it's a slightly different scale as well. It's called CA wall per C in package neck_walls. So I'm adding that one. Hold S on the keyboard, click. There we go, and it should be scaled. It should be scaled to 2.5 general scale. And it should be, again, a weird number, 1.2813 high. So 2813 high. A weird number, but I noticed that this one works best in this case. I'm placing it next to it. I will have to place it better later on. We can actually already duplicate this one. You can select it, duplicate it up. So we have 2 of these windows. Gives a bit more sense of proportion and scale. And you can take this one as well, duplicate it to the other side, and then mirror it. Because as you can see, it has a corner, so we want to mirror it. Right click it, and then transform on Y. You can see this is Y. The green arrow points like this. So I want to transform it on Y. There we go. Push it in a little bit. Something like that. Make sure the other side has the same location. So this one is cutting through the bolts. And this one too now, so now it's in the middle. And then we need a special arch. So back to the content browser. I'm looking for this one. Very specific shape. It's called CA wall STR cut 1. And it should get scale 3. So scaling it to 300%, or the number 3, rotating it and placing it on top of the other 2 pillars. You can see you can look inside the pillar, so we should move these 2 to cover that up. Moving them in a little bit as well, out. And then we should move the windows down a little bit, so they align with the bottom of the pillar. And then we want to add a special window in here. Then we can go back to the content browser and we go to neck_windows. And we're going to be adding this one on top. So this is called window 1. Looks like this. Adding that one. And it should be a 1.5 scale. And then you can push it in a little bit and it more or less fits. Kind of. It's not perfect, but it will do. And it's quite high on the building. The player is standing here, so you won't notice that it's not perfect. You notice that you have a small space in between here now. And we're going to be covering this space up with yet another mesh. So go back to the content browser and you go back to walls. And we're looking for a standard arch. I think this one. Verifying, yes it is. So looking for a very standard arch. Perhaps even this one. This one will do. And it's CA wall STR A, but it's a standard arch. And adding that one with a default scale. Placing it in front of the hole, so it looks like a support from the building, but in fact actually covers up the hole. I do think it's not entirely in the middle. And then we get going on the top. So what we have on the top is, zoom in, is a special wall panel with a lamp attached. We're not going to do the lamp yet. We'll come back to lighting later on. So we'll focus on this special panel, and then we'll focus on the ring on top and the connection to the roof. And then we'll get going with the pillars. So the special wall first. Back to the content browser. In the package neck walls, we are looking for this one. So it's SM arch walls 1. And we're adding it on top. It should get scale 2. So scale 2. And we're going to be adding a piece of trim in between as well in a moment. So I'll raise this up a little bit so we can add some special decoration piece in between. And well, actually, let's do the decoration piece first. Easier. That one is, I use this one. Doesn't matter a great deal what you use, but this one was easy to use. It's Armor Wall 1 hash. So it's a short version. And it should be scale 2 and 1.25 high. So 1.125 high and general scale 2. Placing something like this and duplicating it another time to get longer. And I'm placing this on top. And then we'll want to have another ring on top. The ring on top is again this one. So we're selecting these two meshes, duplicating them, and placing it on top. Should be scaled 2.5 the general scale and 1.5 high, but it already is. Aligning the two pieces again and then placing it on top. So yeah, the building starts to shape up now, and then we'll move on to the pillars on the sides. I go back to the content browser, and we're gonna find the trims. It's in trim, and it's this one. So CA wall trim STRA. Looks like this, and place it in the level. And it should be scaled. It should be scaled to 2.5, and the height should be 1.5. So it's stretched a little. So X is the height in this case because we just rotated it. So X now became the height. So X 1.5 and the general one 2.5. And place it next to the other ones. Kind of like this. Move it down all the way. A little gap in between here, but it doesn't really matter right now. We'll be placing PSP brushes behind these meshes later on, and those PSP brushes will fill up these gaps and also this gap, so don't mind the gap. Copying it up, gets a bit high. Maybe we shouldn't have used 1.5 for this. Maybe 1 was okay, and then 2 at 1, well, still doesn't match. Well, we can go for example 125 on both, like that. We're just trying to scale them both so we can hopefully cover this length. For now we can do it like this. We can just align the top, and when we're going to be making the door, we will probably have to add another mesh here anyway, so we can handle this problem later on. Copying it to the other side. And then we had 2 little statues on top. Actually, I'm gonna pull this out a little bit more. And we have 2 little statues on top, so back to the content browser. And I think in support, I used this one. Bit of a weird, some kind of sculpture, statue, something. It's called Claw Tree. And I'm using that one on top of the building. Rotating it, it's too small, going for scale 2, I think. So scale 2, something like that. Copying it. There we go. And now we're going to go back to brush. Actually, we'll have to make one more small little edge with meshes, and after that we'll go back to brushes. So let's do the little edge first. In the screenshots you can see there's actually a little wall coming out of the tower. This one. So we'll first make the little wall and then we'll go back to brushes. Back to the content browser. Looking for neck trims. And we're using this one. So it's deco str a, adding it to general scale, and it should be a x 1.125. It is, so it's a bit extra, a bit longer. We can push it into the tower. It should be positioned roughly like this. And back to the content browser, and then we find a accompanying curve. This one. So this is the curved version of that piece. It's called curve B. Same thing here, general scale 2, but however we shouldn't scale it. We shouldn't scale x with the same value, because if we would do that, then this surface, this face, would be longer than this one, and that would be bad. So 1, 1, 1 for the 3 axis, but 2 general scale. We align it, we duplicate this one, and we rotate it 90 degrees. And we connect it to this side. And that's it. You can copy them. I move them. And then we're going to be duplicating them to the other side. So duplicating it, right clicking, transform, mirror on Y. And we add it on roughly the same distance from the side, roughly. You can use top down if that's easier for you. Also, actually, in a 2D viewport, you can also measure distances. So if you hold down the middle mouse button, the scroll wheel, and you click, you get a little ruler. So this could be handy to measure the distance between 2 points. So you could say this is the end. So this one is 392, pretty much. And this one is roughly, not very exact, but 384. So this one should be one step more to that side, kind of. So scroll wheel, press down the scroll wheel and click and drag. I can also go a little deeper into why I'm using numbers like these. I can show you as example. So this is a modular mesh. The scale 1, 1, 1. And when I copy it and place it next to it, it neatly snaps to the grid and it neatly aligns, yes? However, if this were to be scale, well, for example, scale 125, that's a nice number. It's 25% added to it. Then it still nicely snaps to the grid. If this were to be 1.5, it still snaps to the grid. And 1.75, etc. Right? But if we were to go for a value like 1.3 instead of 125, then it doesn't snap to the grid anymore. There's a space in between, and I can't actually align it. I can change the grid if I want to. At the bottom you have this. You can lower it to 1 by clicking the little this one. It's off the resolution of the video, but if you click this, you get a little drop down box and you can select 1, smallest grid. You should preferably stick to a higher grid, but you can go to 1. But even on grid 1, I can't actually align it, as you can see. It's impossible. So with a value like 1.3, it's impossible to align 2 meshes, even on the lowest grid. And that's why we go for values like 125, because 125 is alignable. There we go. And that explains those numbers. So basically you go for 1.5, 125, 1.125, because 125 is half of 0.25. I mean, half of this would be this, I believe. And then you can go another step lower. You can take half of this value and That's actually where I'm losing it. So at some point I had someone make a little program for me where I can enter this. So I can go for 125 and then I can just go down in steps. So this would be a correct number. This would be a correct number. This, etc. So I can show you. I can use this value as a scale and it will still align. It nicely aligns. However, I wouldn't have been able to do this with 1.08, for example. There's no way I could have done that. And that's why we go for nice numbers, even if those nice numbers may look actually really complicated, like this one, and not so nice. They are in fact nice. So if you scale things, try to stick to numbers like this or like this, etc. Raising the grid again. There's a shortcut for the grid, is the left and right brackets on the keyboard. Like this, I usually work in a grid of 8 or 16, 4 sometimes, depends what I'm doing. So I'll go back to 8, kind of standard. And we're now going to use BSP to fill up this space, make a wall behind the building, and we're going to fill this up with sand. So right now it's just a wall, so we want to have this filled up. So there's sand filling this area. And then we're going to make a little road in the middle. We also want to have 2 pools that make an L-shaped like pool on both sides. And this is just a big box right now, so we want to cut off a part here and there to make it get a bit of another shape going. So we're going back to brushes. You get your red builder brush again, moving it back. And you can right click the cube button again, so you can enter the size. I'm going to restore it to something smaller. Default size 256. There we go. This too, these are all nice numbers. I would never enter 300, because 300 would be a value that's off the grid. Well, especially if it would be 303, for example, that would be even worse. The only way I could align a 303 sized brush would be to work on grid 1, and it would be really bad, and would be really, it's not easy to work like that. It's better and much easier if the brush is just snapped to the grid in bigger steps. So the numbers, the values I use are always bigger values, like 256, 512, 1024, 2048, 4096, and anything in between that. So you could do, for example, 128 plus 64 becomes 192, and you can add another times 32 to that, and I think you get 224, etc. You can combine powers of 2 and work with those values. So 16, 32, 48, 64, etc. So I'm returning to a box of 256, default size. And I'm placing it inside. I want to make sure that the top more or less aligns with the top of the wall, like this. And a trick I have is to position the camera on exactly the same height as the brush. So if both if the 2 edges of the surface line up like they're doing right now, then I know that my camera is on exactly the same height. And if I now move the brush around by holding Ctrl Shift, I have a very good look on where the brush is and how high it is. So that's a trick. Perhaps a bit too difficult. And you can also just use a side view if that's easier for you. This is fine. We don't want to have it sticking above it. We want to have it stick inside the top of the wall like this. So this is good. And then we want to resize this brush. We could use this. We could use another value here, but it's not so handy to use these values because you have to go guess a value, or you would have to go to top-down view and then measure a value, measure the distance, and it kind of breaks your workflow. So usually it's far easier to actually modify this brush instead of making a new brush. And that's exactly what we're going to do. In the left toolbar, this button, so the top right button in the left toolbar, geometry mode, click it and you will get a little sub menu like this. This allows you to modify existing brushes or the red brush. We can click a surface, as you can see. We can click the surface and then you can simply drag it out. This is a far faster way of resizing brushes than having to enter the numbers manually. So this is what I usually do. Usually I work like this. I enter some kind of number that's more or less in the direction of what I want. For example, if I want to do a smaller surface like this, I enter smaller values or the default values in this case. And then I simply go from there and I simply drag it out and resize it like this. Because this is far faster. So you can do that. You can resize it. I'm going to align the bottom face with the floor. Don't really have to. And I take this side, I push it entirely into the tower, like that. And then I'll align this face with where the curve starts. You can see the curve starts here. This is the seam between the two meshes. So I make sure that it stops here. And then we have to fill up this space. I can't just do this. If I were to do this, then of course I have this area filled up, but it would also stick out. So that's pretty bad. So what we're going to do is, let me align it first again. We're going to extrude this face into two parts. So I'm going to modify the brush pretty heavily, and then we're going to push the edges in a little bit. So you kind of make a low poly curve, basically. So in this menu, in the geometry tools menu, you can click extrude. And while this is selected, every time you move, you will create a new extrusion. So I'm moving. This is extrusion 1, as you can see. It adds faces. And let me do it a second time. And there we go. And now we click edit again, because we want to edit the brush again. I make sure that this face is in the middle of the two. In the middle of the wall. See, it's in the middle of the wall. And then I select the vertices at the end. Like this. And I drag those in. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that they roughly follow the curve. So there's no hole on this side and you can't see it stick out on this side. And maybe you to do this in top down, so I'm gonna switch to the top down view. And here too I can use the Control plus Alt, so I have the selection frame, and I can use that to select a whole row of vertices. You can see this is good, it's in the middle, and I wanna align this to the end of the curve. Make sure you do this by holding Control Alt and dragging like this, because if you just select one of the vertices, you may miss the one below it, because there are two vertices on top of each other. So I'm doing it like this to make sure I have both of them. Align it with the curve, and the idea is that this vertex, these two vertices actually, are somewhere in this space, and that this line never actually leaves this space, so it doesn't stick out on either side. So I'm moving it up a little bit, so it's hopefully in the middle. And I think I can go one step there. You can see that this red line, it goes out of the inside, so this is bad. I have to fix this. I think I can actually move it up a little bit. Actually, this one is entirely wrong. This entire line should be in between this space here, because this is the inside of the wall. So I have to fix that first. Selecting it and placing it inside, so that's good. And you can see this red line is now entirely in the inside of the wall. It doesn't leave this area. That's good. Same on this side. obviously goes way through, and that's bad. I'm trying to fix it like this, and it's slightly off here, but I think we'll survive that. So this is pretty okay. I press W to hide meshes, and you can see I have a very low poly curve, and that's good. So going back to 3D view, and pressing W again, as you can see, good curve. And then we simply press add again. So on the left side, add this button, and we get an actual brush. Moving it away, and you can see that by moving it away, this brush isn't modified. This brush isn't actually this brush. This is just a template brush. It creates other brushes, but it isn't actual any real existing brush. I can show you that as an example down here. So if you make a cube, click add. There you go, have a cube. You make another few cubes, add, and another one. So I now have 3 cubes. And I can't select them. If I click it, I just select the surfaces. I can't actually select the brushes. The only way you can select the brush is if you were to switch to wireframe. This one, first one, brush wireframe, not wireframe, has to be brush wireframe. And then you can see the blue brushes. These are the actual brushes, so if I move this, then I can move the actual brush. I'm switching back to unlit mode, and nothing happened. Well, the brush is obviously here, yet I can still see the brush being over here. This is because you have to recompile the level every time you want to change a brush. Right? So if you add a new brush using the red builder brush, then changes are instantly. This does instantly add itself, or does other things. However, if you were to modify an existing brush, then you first have to recompile the level to see that change. And you can recompile the level. Recompiling in Unreal is called rebuilding, by going to the top toolbar, and you have this little cube at the top. Build geometry for current level. If you click that, then you will actually, as you can see, he has actually updated it. You will get an error window, but you can just completely ignore it for now. Just move it away, press close, just get rid of it. So every time you change existing brushes, you have to use the rebuild tool, rebuild feature, to make changes appear. That also goes, for example, we're going to select this brush. I'm going in geometry edit mode, and I make it larger. It's a lot larger. However, here it still hasn't resized itself until I hit rebuild. There we go. So every time you use, you change something, you must use a rebuild. I can explain a little why using most of these primitives is a bad idea. I'll make a bigger box as example. That's adding it. Actually, this one can go. Also, yeah, if you want to select a brush, instead of having to go to a brush wireframe every time, you can also hold down Ctrl, Shift, and clicking it in the 3D view. And that allows you to select the brush in 3D. Okay, so I'm deleting it. As you can see, I deleted this brush, but it's still here until I hit rebuild. So yeah, let's add a sphere. So I right click it and get options, and I want to have a sphere with 3 extrapolation, so it's a lot smoother, perhaps even 4. There we go. And I'm going to place on top of the cube I made, and I press add. Now we have a sphere. However, this is a really bad idea to do. First of all, it's really difficult to align the textures on these faces. You've got a lot of different faces. Secondly, brushes do not support smoothing in Unreal. So if this is hit by lightning, it will look like it's made up of many different separate faces, like it really is. And it will not come across as being one smoothed object. And that's pretty bad for a sphere or anything round. Cylinder is also wouldn't survive it. And a cone neither. And the biggest problem of them all, if you were to switch to wireframe view, so not brush wireframe, but the normal wireframe view, you can see that any brush that touches another brush actually cuts up the surface below it. So it really cuts into the surface it hits, and it starts dividing it. And this can get you extremely messy results. I can show you. So let's take the sphere again, and let's add another sphere next to it. And you can see where this is going. This is becoming an entire gigantic mess, basically. And if you do this too much, it will eventually even die, or you will get errors, or you will get a missing collision, and all kinds of other problems. As you can see, this is really a mess. And look at these faces. I mean, they're extremely small and random, and it just goes everywhere. This is really bad. So that's why you want to keep the BSP simple, and why you want to use simple brushes, not hugely complex brushes like these. That's why you just want to stick to cubes and do simple things with cubes, and do the majority of the detail with meshes instead. We would have never been able to build this building with brushes, because we wouldn't have been able to do all this smoothing with brushes. Brushes are supposed to be simple. So I'm going to delete all of these again. And then we can move on to the next big thing of brushes in Unreal. Resizing it back to a smaller size, 256, small cube. And we now have 2 cubes. Actually, I have to rebuild. So you see, I deleted a lot of things, but it's still here until you rebuild. A really big thing of Unreal is the fact that you can subtract brushes from another brush. And it's even the way to go, actually. So on the left side you had add, and on the right of that you had subtract. So if I make sure that my red brush overlaps an existing brush, and I press subtract, it will remove all of it that was overlapping. And this allows you to build more complex brushes than just cubes. This is also really handy for a door or for other things. So in most other brush engines, let's just take a Source or a Quake as example. If you want to build a room in Quake, then you need to have 6 different brushes. You need to have 1 floor, 4 different wall brushes, and 1 ceiling. And if you also want to make a door in one of the walls, then you will have to add 3 more brushes, because you would have 1 wall on the left, 1 wall on the right, and 1 piece of wall above the door. That's quite complicated. You need quite a lot of brushes to do something simple, while in Unreal, all you would need to do is make your brush, the red builder brush, the size of the door, and simply press subtract, and there you go, you have a hole, you have a door. It also goes for a room. If in Unreal you would want to have an indoor room, you would be able to build a cube, like this, and adding it, and then simply make a smaller cube. This is smaller, and press subtract, and there we go, we have an actual room. So in Unreal you can build a room with just 2 brushes instead of 6 brushes. And that speeds up the workflow a lot. For example, I can make a door into this now. Make a tiny cube, kind of tiny. And there we go, we have a door. So you can build indoor environments pretty fast in Unreal. If you switch to wireframe view, you can see that the subtracted brushes are yellow. So if I move the yellow one, for example, I move to the corner here, switch to unlit mode, it's still here until I rebuild, and then instead it starts subtracting this. So you can still freely modify subtracted brushes if you want to. For example, I can go to brush edit mode, and I can select 2, drag them out, and rebuild, and I get a more special subtraction. So that's actually really nice. One thing also, actually, if you're modifying brushes, so I'm in this mode, geometry edit mode, and let's say you select 2 vertices, you drag them out, and then you get a shape like this. However, you can't go too far with this. For example, if I would just select 1 vertex and drag it out, then it would automatically get triangulated, as you can see. And there's no way I can fix that anymore, really. I can move the vertex back, but that face is still triangulated. You can see it's now made up of 2 different surfaces. And that makes it more complex and it makes it more tricky to texture later on. So be careful if you modify brushes and if you start dragging faces and vertices, that you don't triangulate the surface. Because this is okay, but if I now do it like this, then this side gets triangulated into 2 parts. And sometimes that's actually the intention, maybe your intention, and then it's fine. But if it's not your intention, be careful with accidentally triangulating brushes. And now I have a very weird red brush. To get it back to the original shape, I just press the cube button again, and there we go. I'm gonna delete all of these. And I'm going to go back to the real level. Select the brush you made to fill up this area. Select this one. And duplicate it. Just like you duplicate meshes. I held down Alt on the keyboard, clicked and dragged. Right click transform. Transform over Y. We can mirror it. And position it in the same place on this side. So roughly inside the brush. In this case, grid's a little bit too high, lowering the grid 1 step. And this looks pretty okay, I think. Oh, actually it sticks out. Switching to top-down view. And this looks better. We hit rebuild, and so we can see if it's fine or not. It doesn't appear to stick out anywhere, and it doesn't appear to have any hole anywhere, so this is good. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to subtract 2 brushes, 2 big brushes on the front. Because this right now is just a cube, just a square, and we want to have it a bit nicer shape. We want to be able to have a balcony sticking out, basically. So we get our red brush. And we want to now rescale it so we can subtract an entire corner away. However, resizing the red brush would take a lot of time. And it would probably be faster to do the following. You select the big brush, the very first one you made. And you right click it. Polygons to brush. And this makes the red brush take over this size and this shape and also the textures assigned to it. It's way easier like this to make the red brush quickly take over the size and the textures and everything from an existing brush like this, instead of manually having to resize and rescale a brush and all that stuff. So now we have our basic brush to subtract with. So I'm resizing it and I'm making it about as big as this. Sticks out a little bit. I mean, we need a bit of space between the edge of the brush and this little wall. And we also need enough space in between the wall and where we're going to subtract, because we want to make a small pool in between the two. So something like this looks pretty okay. Something like this, and then you simply hit subtract. And there you go, you remove the corner. You can move the red brush to the other side, and you do the same thing on the other side. There we go. I'm afraid it may be a bit too thin, the balcony. So I'm gonna modify these 2 subtracted brushes, switching to wireframe view, selecting the 2 yellow ones, and I'm going to push both of them out a little bit, shortening them a bit. Something like this perhaps. There we go, rebuilding. And that's better. So I could have also done this by simply making one big brush and then adding a smaller brush in front of it. I could have done that, but I choose not to. And it doesn't really matter which approach you take, but this was a good demonstration to demonstrate subtractive brushes. So you can do either. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to make 2 small pools here on both sides, and after that we'll make a road cutting through the middle. Pools first. So clicked it, resetting it to just a default scaled brush, default size brush. and I'm placing it where the pool is going to be. Something like this. I'm aligning the top face with the floor. By positioning my camera like this, I know that it's on the floor. But if you want to be certain, you can switch to a side view. You can turn off the meshes. You just press W on the keyboard. So you don't have brushes, and as you can see, it nicely snapped to the floor. I'm gonna click and drag a little bit. And there we go. On this side as well, something like this maybe. A bit more, or not so much maybe. A bit wider maybe. And then we click subtract on the left again. And there we go, we have a little pool. And then we're going to rotate this brush, same way as we rotate meshes. And we place it next to the other one. So we can create an L shape, basically. As you can see, in this case, it seems to be hard to line the brushes. Don't really want to do it, so we can lower the grid, and hopefully it does so then. It does. But if it doesn't want to snap to the grid, so let's mess it up. So now we have a big grid. I can better show this in a top-down viewport, actually. So right, it's off the grid, as you can see. Doesn't fit to the grid. What you can do is right-click a corner, and by right-clicking a corner, it will snap back to the grid. So that's a very handy trick. Same here. Just simply right-click it, and that's it. It's an easy way to quickly align things, especially when they're off the grid or on a lower grid. I'm gonna make it this one a bit thinner, because otherwise we don't have enough space left for the road in between. And then stretch it out. Something like that, maybe, yeah. Again, we press subtract, and we now have an L-shaped pool. Actually, this brush was moved, and we haven't rebuilt it yet, so now we do. And as you can see, it looks as it's supposed to look. You can move the brush away. Or actually, we can do the road first. So I'm gonna move the brush to the middle, and I want to have a road cutting through. Right now, if you select the floor, it's one big surface. It's one big selection, and if you want to texture this, and it's impossible to actually have two different textures, what we want to have is have a different texture in the middle. If you were to texture this, it would just be one big surface with one single texture. In order to cut a surface into two and be able to assign two different textures to it, we have to do brush syncing. And brush syncing is a method of adding a new brush on exactly the same height as an existing one. And whereas in most engines this goes wrong, and whereas this also goes wrong when you use meshes, with brushes you can actually do that in Unreal. So I'm going to make it a bit longer. Something like that, maybe. And same on the other side. Like this. It doesn't have to go all the way to the end. I mean, this will be covered by other things anyway. And I'm going to make it wider. Seems to be fairly symmetrical right now, maybe slightly off. Like that, seems to be fairly symmetrical. You can see the distance between this point and this is about the same as this distance, so I think it's in the middle. And then we simply press add. Moving the brush away. And as you can see, this is now a different surface. If you would have done this with meshes, let me find an appropriate mesh to show this with. Just as a test, just trying to find something. I think this one maybe. Probably this one is on the grid. So if you had to do this with meshes, and you line up the top face of a mesh with the floor, you get this flickering going on. And this also happens in many other engines when you have two brushes overlapping. But in Unreal, however, it actually works really well. It actually allows you to separate two surfaces. That's cool. You can select these two brushes. So I held Ctrl Shift and I clicked them. Or you can go to wireframe view and just select the two yellow ones. And then we want to duplicate and mirror them. So I held on Alt on the keyboard, clicked and dragged. And then right click transform over Y. There we go. And you make sure that this distance is the same here. Like this. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. No one will notice. And when we rebuild, the subtraction will show up. Next, we're going to texture all of this. So we're going to go into texturing for brushes. Go to the content browser and find a material that you like. If you have used the filter on the top, make sure you enable materials. So you can see them, green ones. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to texture the big floor. For that one I used, let me see, I think NR floor. Yes, I used this one. So NR floors looks like this, and simply select it and click and drag it to the surface. There you go. In this case you may want to scale it up. It's a bit small, I think it should be twice as big. And in order to do that you can right click and then take surface properties. Get a big window and you have a section scaling here. So you can enter, for example, 2, or you can select 2 from the drop-down menu and press apply. Then we want to do the floor. So we can move this away, or you can close it if you want to. Go back to the content browser, and I believe I made a new one. Yeah, so you can go to the package E3D intro to UDK content, package made for this level. And if you expand it, you can see 2 groups, source assets and to be used. You can ignore source assets. These are just the things I used while building the level. And focus on to be used. And in here you have a couple of things we're going to use later on to finish the level. And I use this one for the floor. So it's floor BSP tile 1 darker. I made a darker version of an existing floor somewhere. So you can select it again. And you simply click and drag it on. Again, it's too small, I think. So you can go back to the surface properties like this, or you can also simply double click it. Again, scale 2, I think will do. Apply and done. And next up, we want to texture this. Same on the other side. And as you can see, it's made up of 3 different surfaces right now. And these 2 obviously don't align. So what you can do to align textures that are mismatched is to select them. So I select all of them that I want to align. Go into the surface properties, and then you have a section alignment. I can select planar and I can press apply, and it will automatically match the different surfaces together. For this I used sand texture actually. So the sand I used is in terrain, UN terrain. There we go. I use this one, UN terrain dirt 4. As you can see, if you do this with multiple surfaces, it gets a bit annoying to assign. And there are better ways actually to assign textures that we'll get to in a moment. Again, it's too small, I think, so I can right click surface properties and scale 2. And then we want to port this texture over to this side. What you can do is to simply select the surface, Ctrl C to copy it, select the surfaces down here, and simply Ctrl V it. So we can actually copy paste textures from one side to the other. We also want to have it on these floors, so I'm Ctrl Ving this as well. And then we want to do the walls. If you have a whole series of walls, then you can also right click one of them, select surfaces, all adjacent walls, and then you get all of them at once, which is a lot faster. For this I use a texture like, for example, neck walls, and I use this one. This again is a case where if you would simply click and drag it on, you would have to do it again for every single surface, and it gets a bit annoying. What you can also do is right click one of them and then in the menu select apply material, and that's a lot faster. Again, we go into surface properties. Instead of double clicking it or right clicking it, you can also simply press F5 on the keyboard. I make sure they are all aligned, so planar alignment, and again I think it's too small, so I go for scale 2. Again, I copy it, so I select one, Ctrl C on the keyboard. On this side I want to have all the walls, so select all the walls and then Ctrl V and done. Next up, the big walls on the outside, selecting those, and again I could do Ctrl V for example, but it's still too small I think. So selecting them again, surface properties, and I think this should be scale 4 instead. And then we'll move on to making the door. So we're going to be making the door, and after that we'll also fill up all these holes with new brushes. So back to static meshes for a little moment. Back to the content browser as well. And first of all we want to find the staircase. The staircase I use is in ASC floor, I believe. I use this one. Very simple staircase. It's stairs sit 1. I'm adding that one. It should be scale 0.75. Let's see, I think this should be 1.875. So it's stretched a little bit. I think that's better. So general scale 0.75 and 1875 on Y. So you can try that. Maybe it doesn't fit, maybe it does. You have quite a height to cover, so we want to have 3 of these stairs. My grid is obviously way too high, so lowering it to like 8. And aligning all the stairs. Well, maybe it is better if this would just be 1. So we can try with 1 first. So 1, 1, 1 on all 3 axes and 0.75 for the general scale. And once more. So I made a little stair. And now we will be adding the doors. The doors are in neck doors. And first of all, I'm using this arch. So it's onion door frame 1. So you can add that one already. That one should have scale 0.875. And then we're going to add the doors that are inside. So these are the doors that are inside. Onion door 1. This too should have scale 0.875. Same as a frame. Placing it inside. And then duplicating it. And mirroring it. And then there's a second frame. Show you on the screenshot. We made the first frame around the door itself, and then there's a lighter frame, lighter gray frame around this frame again. And then there are 2 pillars on both sides. The lighter frame I use is a standard arch, so it's in walls. And I simply use the standard arch we used before, which is this one. So it's a CA wall STR-A. Adding that one, rotating it. So just a default scale 1. And I position it like this. I also position it a little bit in front of the other one, so it sticks out. Kind of like this. Next up, we're going to build the two big pillars on both sides. So back to the content browser again. And I used, let me see, I think, well, neck pillars. And I use this as the bottom, as the base for the pillar. So that's in pillars, SM deco pillar 4. Adding on floor, scale it to 3. So it's quite big. And then add the rest of the pillar on top. So back to the pillar package. And I used pretty heavily decorated one. I think this one. So I use this one on top. It's a ornate pillar 1. Has these two blue lights on both sides. Should be scaled 125. So 1.25. I'm going to rotate it so the blue lights point forward. And then we need the top. So back to the content browser. And this one's in neck deco. Use this one. Babel Spire B. And then we scale it with a very weird scale of 0.91. It's a bit of a weird scale, but in this case it does actually works the best, I found out. Try to place it on top. There will be a minor seam in between the two meshes. You see there's a minor gap in between the two, but we'll have to live with that. If you want, you can try to scale it some more and try to cover up the hole. Or perhaps you can find another mesh somewhere in here to place in between the two. Select both of them and press it back a little bit so that the door frame sticks inside, and then duplicate it over to the other side. It's not entirely in the middle, so selecting all the pillars and the door and the arches and moving it to the middle. Then indeed this stair should be scaled. I want the stairs to be as wide as the door, so there's a little gap on the left and a little gap on the right, so you want to fix that. Also, it's kind of weird that the stair goes all the way to the door. Usually there's a little space at the top. It's weird to have a stair that ends at a door like this. So I'm adding a little space at the top, and then I will scale the meshes. I think 1.125 maybe. And then we'll go back to brushes and we're going to fill up all these holes. I'm taking my red builder brush, resizing it back to a default, more manageable size, and I'm moving it to below the staircase. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build a little floor here, because there's a gap in between the staircase and the door. I'm going to fill that up with a little brush. Aligned it with the staircase, resizing it a little bit. Something like that. It's floating a little bit. And we press add. There we go. Next step is that we're going to make a little side to the staircase. And that border will hide the space below the staircase. So I'm trying to align it with the arch. And I make the border as wide as this blue decoration thing on the frame. Like this. Then I select the bottom two vertices. And I drag those out. So to make the border to the staircase, it's important in this place that it sticks out enough. I mean, it shouldn't be like this. In this case, the steps go over the edge, and that's kind of ugly. So I'm pulling it out enough so it completely covers every step. And then again, we add it. This is pretty ugly. We have two different textures meeting each other. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a little border that separates these two. And to make that little border, we're going to use the same technique as this one used. So brush syncing. Adding a brush on exactly the same height as another brush. First thing, this is a little bit off, it sticks over. a little bit not very nice. So I'm going to fix that first. Selecting the brush, selecting the side, and pushing it back a little bit. Same on this side actually. There we go, aligned with the staircase. And then I'm gonna duplicate it. So I duplicated it. As you can see, now I have 2 of these. And then I will align it with this border. There we go. And that's it. So if I were to rebuild this, actually it's a little bit off. So selecting it again and dragging it out, rebuilding. And there we go, we have a new face to select. There are not that many textures in the content browser that are fitting for this. The best one I found was in neck floors, I think. And it was this one. So Stone 2B. This was the best one I found. Perhaps there is a better one somewhere, but this was the best one. It was most fitting for this situation. So I'm adding this one to this face, and I'm also adding it on top of this. Now I selected the brush. On top of this. As you can see, this is completely misaligned. Also down here, it's really wrong. So this is a good case to test out the alignment tools on again. So I pressed F5, get this. I use planar. And now it's aligned. And I also want to have scale 2. To go. Next thing, and this is new, is that we want to align these textures manually. There are a couple of ways of doing this. The first way is in the texture, the surface properties. So again, F5. You get this window again, and then you have these buttons at the top. If you press these, the whole thing moves, as you can see. So you can use these to pan the textures, or you can rotate them if you want to. So use these to align the texture, kind of like this. If you hold down Shift and you click one of them, it goes in the opposite direction. And align it in such a way that these 2 gray borders match the sides, and you have these 2 rows of bricks in the middle. It's not perfect because every here and then there's a cross section and the gray line is interrupted, but it will do for this level. I think this is better. You have a bit more transition between this, from this to this, by this little line in between. For the wall, we can just select this face and simply Ctrl-C it and Ctrl-V it. Same on the inside, and that's it. You can align them if you want to. Select both of them. And align them a little bit better. Now this dark border matches the top, always nice. And we can also copy-paste this one onto this one. And then we can duplicate this brush. Select both that brush and this brush, and duplicate both of them to the other side. There we go, rebuilding, and we fix the staircase. Next up, the walls of the building. So I'm resetting the red builder brush to just a cube again, like that. Aligning it with the little floor we made. There we go, and then we're going to edit it. I'm making it wider, and I make sure it goes completely into the building, something like this. Doesn't really matter how far, but make sure it's deep enough into it. Selecting this one, I just press Q and W on the keyboard to quickly hide both the meshes and the brushes. So I only have my red builder brush, makes it easier to select and see it. I often do it like this, select it and turn it back on, and continue working. It's a bit faster. The first brush you make, it should reach this height, so it will fill up this lower space, and will connect the door frame to the window and these pillars. This is okay, pretty much okay, and I think the rest is okay as well. I'm gonna extend it quite a bit, all the way here, because we want to make a corridor inside later on, and that corridor is going to be a subtracted brush. And in order to subtract a brush from another brush, we obviously first need to have a big added brush. So making sure there is a big brush added behind the building, I can subtract a corridor from inside later on. This will do. So we're pressing add, and since we still have the floor texture selected, this one now takes over the floor texture. The door disappeared, that's fine. Later on we will cut away a brush about the size of the door, and that will fix the door again. So this is good for now, and we can move on to building the sides on both ends of the building. So moving the brush up and moving it back a little bit, aligning it with the mesh on the front, and then we shorten it a little bit. I accidentally moved it up. It's pretty bad. And so I'm going to look in a side view, and I'm going to restore it by looking in a side view. As you can see, it's quite off, so I'm going to drag it down again until it's back to normal, switching back to 3D, and continue with what I was doing. So I'm on the left side, I align the brush with the big pillar, something like that. It doesn't have to go that far into the building. This one could be less, could be something like this. And we have to raise it. This is why I toggle off everything when I want to select something, because it's quite easy to just simply select something wrong. Like I want to have this face, but instead it may select the pillar or something like that. So usually I just toggle everything off, select it, and toggle back everything back on. And dragging it up, making sure it covers the entire space, and then we press add. That's good, it covers up the entire space, no more holes, and if you want to, we can even remove this window, so you can't see it anymore. And also this pillar can also go. I'm deleting those. And then I'm going to add the same brush on the other side as well. And I press add again. And we've now covered the entire building. Next up, texturing these faces. So again, I'm selecting this face and I copy it. And I paste it. And I do the same for these two. Pasting it. And also you can actually see it on the side as well, a tiny little bit. It's a very vertical building, and all these horizontal lines, they don't really help the vertical feeling of the building. So I'm going to go back into the surface properties, and I'm going to rotate these, so we have some nice vertical lines going up. Also, I want to move them a bit, because as you can see, it's not very symmetrical. I have a thicker line here, and this one is a pretty thin line, and so it's not really symmetrical. So I'm going to select the left one and rotate it 180 degrees. And then I'm going to pan this one so it's identical to this one. Instead of using these tools to pan, I can, however, also go to the left toolbar and use this T, texture alignment mode. And that's actually easier than using the surface properties, because now you can actually simply drag the texture to align it. So I'm dragging it, and I make the thick line match the side of the pillar, or whatever it is, and I will do the same on the other side. I'm also going to align this face, so I'm gonna push it up and make sure the dark line aligns with the top. It's a bit more finished. Next, we're going to cut away the door. So we click the cube button again and move it into place. I can hide meshes, W, makes it easier to see things. Aligning it with the floor, goes in too much. We're going to make a fairly thin brush, even thinner than this, I think. Has to be inside the arch, and then we simply make it fit the door. Same on the other side. And then, just like we did with this one, we're going to extrude it a few times and then make a low poly curve that will follow the arch. I think 3 times will do. So this is 1, 2, 3. I selected extrude, just like I did with the other one. Going back to edit now, moving the window away again. And then it's probably best to do this in the front view. So switching views. And I'm now going to align it better. So the top is good, the top is inside. And I'm going to select the vertices on the left side, move them in, and make sure they're inside the pillar. All of them. And the same on this side. You can see the lead line is inside the pillar still. Now it would be outside. So I'm trying to make sure it stays within the curve. Something like that should do, I believe. Going back to a 3D view. And if I subtract this, it should be alright. So subtracting it, and there, and as you can see, the door reappeared, and I think it's fine. Next up, we're going to make a corridor behind this door. So I'm going back to a cube, pressing the cube button again, and actually I will rescale, resize it. So right-clicking it, and I think I should go for I don't know, 512 or 512, 512, 512 3 times. Close it, and I'm going to align the brush again, aligning it with the floor. It's much too high. As you can see, if I were to subtract this, it would make a hole in the roof, and we obviously don't want that. So I'm lowering it a little bit, and I'll make sure it's somewhere below the roof of the other brush. I also make it long enough, as long as I want my corridor to be. I think something like that. And it's too wide. As you can see, it goes all the way until here, and I want the corridor to go just until just here. So I'm moving it in a little bit. Same on the other side. And then we simply press subtract. There we go, we have a corridor inside the building. As you can see, these two pieces of the tower are sticking into the corridor. That's obviously pretty bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to select those parts and also their corresponding other halves. And we're simply going to rotate everything a little bit. And by doing so, and moving it back into place, and by doing so, we actually fix the problem, and no one will notice that they're slightly rotated. And then we will also rotate these. So rotating it a little bit, about 39 degrees or something, and then moving it back into place. You can see that this distance is roughly the same as this, so it's symmetrical. I'm going to rebuild, made a couple of changes, and there we go, fixed. We're pretty much done with all the brushes now. So I'm going to select the red one, and actually you can press B on the keyboard, and B hides the red brush. So we can press B and get it away. We can texture the inside, roughly, really quickly. We'll come back to the inside later on, but we'll just copy paste the floor. So just copy paste this one, pasting it on and pasting it on. And I can do the same for the walls, copying it and quickly pasting it on. And the rest we will do later. Next up, we're going to be building a couple of decorational pieces. So for example, we have these arches going from the buildings. These. There are also two of the pillars at the front, at the balcony, and arches going away from those. We also have statues standing in front of the building, so we're going to do that as well. And we will do the balcony itself. A little balcony around the entire edge. Plus, after that, we'll go into the rocks. So we'll start off with these arches and the statues, and then we'll move on to this one. You can go back to the content browser. I'm going to disable materials. I only see static meshes. And the arch is in NR supports. This is the arch I'm using. Called SM buttress. I'm adding that one. And in this case, as you can see, the mesh is not where the pivot point is. So this is the pivot point, but there's no mesh to be seen here. Nothing below the ground either. nothing here. The mesh is actually up there. And in this case, the pivot point is not on the same location as the mesh is. And this is something that can happen. It's because how the mesh has been made in a 3D modeling program. So it is something that can happen and we'll just have to live with it. There are ways to fix it, but we'll not get into those for the time being. This one should be scaled to 0.5, I believe. And then I'm going to rotate it and connect it to the building in the middle of it. Next up, we need a pillar. So back to the content browser. And we're going to neck pillars. And I use this one as pillar. It's called CA sub 2. Adding it. And it should be scaled to 1.5. So 1.5 general scale. And it should also be 125 height. So 1.5 and 1.25. We're going to align it with the pillar, the arch. Something like this. Pushing it in. And then we need to have the base for the pillar. I'm using the same one. So copying it. There we go. And then I'm going to select all three and duplicate them again. And then I'm going to select just the arch and the pillar and move them down. So we can create a double arch that goes on in a continuous line. That's it. Notice how the line is one continuous line. If I would have done it like this, it would have been more ugly because you can see the line break up, goes up a bit again, and then it continues falling down. It is prettier usually if you don't touch ongoing lines. I mean, this is a line that's on its way down, so it should have a clear way down. It shouldn't be broken up like this because it usually gets a bit more ugly in my opinion. So I'm doing it like this, and then I'm going to select all of it and cloning them to the other side. And then we can get going on the statues. Go to the content browser again. And I go to neck deco. And there you can find the statue. So this is the statue I'm using. It's called Kukuchlen or whatever it's supposed to be. Some strange name, pose 3. So adding that to the world. And scaling it up a lot. Scale 5. And then we also need to have the foot of the statue. There's a little socket below the statue. So back to the content browser. And I'm using this one as the socket. It's called Statue Angel 1 Flint. Adding that one as well. And that one should be scale 3. So scale 3 for this one and 5 for the statue itself. The art seems to be pretty close by the statue. Not really all that pretty, so I'm gonna move it. But it will do. And then I'm cloning the statue to the other side. Right click, transform, over Y. Same here, selecting the arches. And moving them a little bit. And then I'm going to make a little balcony in the front. So we have 2 pillars, the same pillars as are used for the doors. So I'm going to add 2 pillars in the balcony. And then again, these pillars and these arches. So selecting the pillars near the door. And duplicating them. And then selecting an arch and a pillar. And pushing it into those pillars. We want to extend the pillar a lot because it has to go way down. So I'm gonna duplicate it downwards a couple of times. And again. and probably one more time. Select all of them and duplicate the entire set for the other one. I think the blue light should be on the side. I'm going to rotate this pillar 90 degrees. We can see we have another pillar down here. So I'm going to select one pillar, one arch and another pillar and duplicate it. Move it to the right and align it with the side. Move it down a little bit. Something like that. And again, same story here. Selecting the pillars and duplicating them downward. And another few times. Selecting the entire set for the other side. Making sure it's on the line. So we can start on rocks. You can go to the content browser. And you can go to rocks. UN rock. This one. Get a couple of different rocks here. And I'm going to be using these. Cliffs half 2, cliffs top, cliffs whole 2. And that's basically it. So these 5. They look like this. You can add all 5 to the level. Just anywhere, doesn't really matter. That's 1. That's number 2. This is mesh number 3. And 4. And this is the last one. So I added 5 different rock meshes to the world. And what we're going to do now is we're going to copy paste these around and push them into each other, scale them up, scale them down, etc. And by doing all of that, we're going to make an entire mountain pretty much. So for example, I start with this piece and I'm going to scale it up a lot, like to 3. Big mesh, perhaps too big, perhaps should go for 2 to begin with. So I scale it to 2 and then I simply push it half into the building so it forms boundary of the level. Same for these 2, and then you simply place it behind the first one. You press it into the building and into the previous rock. And you keep on doing this for a while until you have built an entire rock wall, basically. It's a bit messy. It would be slightly better to model the entire rock wall as one big gigantic mesh in a modeling program. But this will work, and this has advantages too. This will occlude better, for example. And this will have a smaller impact on the memory, because there are many different meshes. Once you got the first group covered, you can duplicate them again and then scale them up a step more. So I'm going for scale 3. Place them behind it. And continue. You can make another ring behind those. You can scale it up even more, going to 4. We also have to go down. It's also important. You can scale them up even more, going to 8. Actually 8 is a bit over top, so 5 maybe. And then we can select all the rocks. And then simply clone the entire thing. to the left, right click, transform mirror on Y. And before you know it, you have covered the entire section. I'm going to rotate a couple of these blocks to break the symmetrical feel of it a little bit. So I'm pushing this one up a bit, pushing this one down a little bit. A couple of cheap tricks. Duplicating this one. And that's it. We did all the rocks in the level. And it actually starts to look like something now. Next you can go to the content browser again. And you can go to the package for this level. So E3D Intro to UDK content. And click on to be used. And in there we've got a couple of special meshes. We got distant land. So select distant land. And add it somewhere. It doesn't really matter where you add it, but I would preferably add it somewhere on the floor here. As you can see, you get a huge, really large mesh down there. This will be the ground below, where the forest will be grown on. And then you go to the content browser again, and you select distant trees this time. So these are all the trees. And you do the same thing for those. So you just click somewhere and add them. There you go. Next, you need to have the fog ring. So this is just a bit of a ring with a gradient applied. So fog ring. Same thing for this one. Just add it somewhere and it will show up. Next, the sky. So we're going to be adding the sky to the level now. You can go to the content browser once again. And you can go to UN Sky. There we go. And you need to have Sky Dome 5. Looks like this. Again, just add it somewhere. And as you can see, you get a sky. I'm going to move it down because I want to fill up this space. So I'm moving the sky down. Probably a better idea to do this in a 2D view. Would go faster. But this works as well. There we go. As you can see, skies in Unreal are actually one gigantic mesh. So while other engines and also the first two Unreal engines had sky boxes, where a small box with sky textures was projected around the level, in Unreal Engine 3 you actually make a real life-sized sky, literally. You look in a side view, and as you can see, it's a gigantic mesh. So it's a very simple and easy way of making a sky, basically. You just place a gigantic mesh with a sky texture on it around the entire level, and that's it. If you look at the screenshot, we have an orange sky, a sunset, and this color obviously doesn't really do it. So I'm going to be changing this color on the sky. Go to the content browser, and you go to the package E3D Intro to UDK content, and the to be used folder. I made make sure you have materials turn on at the top. No materials. I made a new sky material, an orange one. So we're going to be replacing this material with this one instead. And to do that, you go to the properties of the sky. So simply double click the mesh and you get a properties window. A lot of things, a lot of properties you can find in here. And you can simply ignore all of these. So just ignore all of this and go to static mesh actor. Expand it again. And then go to rendering. And there you can find materials. You click the green plus on the right, add a new item, and you get a new slot below it. Make sure that the new sky material is selected in the content browser. It's selected, and while it is selected, click the green arrow, and there you go. We have successfully replaced the material of this mesh. Next, we will have to turn off a couple of properties because they are really large meshes, and for example, they do not require collision, and collision will only be hit on performance and on the hardware. So we're going to turn off collision of all of these meshes, and we'll also have to turn off shadow casting of the sky because we obviously don't want the sky to cast a shadow. That would be really weird. So in order to do those things, simply select them. So select the sky again, and make sure you get the properties again. If you close it, simply double click it again, or you can right click and go to static mesh actor properties. Same thing. Or you can simply press F4. That's all the same thing. You can go to collision, and then collision type, you set it to no collision. So I change this from block all to no collision. That's step 1. Step 2, you go to static mesh actor at the bottom, expand it again, and you go to lightning. And here you have to turn off cast shadow. And in this case, for the sky, you also turn off accept lights and accept dynamic lights. A sky doesn't receive lightning, it's just bright. We can switch to lightning mode, and as you can see, everything is pitch black because there is no light in the level, except the sky, which is just full bright. So a sky never accepts light. So in order to win performance and all those kind of things, turn off the lightning on the sky and the shadow casting. You have to do the same for the fog ring. So I'm selecting the fog ring. Got it selected, as you can see. And same thing here. Accept lights, accept dynamic lights, cast shadow, and no collision. And the same, not entirely the same actually, for these two. So you can select both of them at the same time, the floor and the forest. And again, no collision. And you turn off cast shadow, but you do want these to accept light. So you keep this on, but you only turn off cast shadow in this case. And that's basically it. And then we can start with lightning. So now things are going to get interesting. We'll start with the sunlight first and ambient light. Then we'll move on to smaller detail lightning, and we'll also get going on some other things like post-processing, those kind of things. You can go to the content browser again. There you go. And on the top you have a second tab. It's called actor classes. So all the actors in Unreal are what you would call entities in Half-Life or Quake or etc. So there are things you can place, and they're usually invisible in-game, but that have a purpose. Like a light. The light itself is invisible in-game, but it obviously has a purpose. A player start, for example. So those kind of things are usually actors. What we're going to start with is adding ambient light to the world. So we can go to light, expand light, and you want to have a skylight. You don't need to expand it, so you don't want to have this one, you want to have the main class, skylight itself. So you select it, and then you go to the level, and it doesn't really matter where you add it, just add it somewhere. So I'm adding it like on the floor, and I right click on the floor. And then you have the option add skylight here. So depending on which one you select in the actor classes, that shows up in the right click menu. For example, now I have point light, and now I have a skylight. So add skylight. And then you get this actor. This is invisible in game, and I'm gonna raise it up. It doesn't really matter where you place it. It always affects the entire level. So it doesn't matter where you place it, but I usually place it somewhere in the middle above my level. Like this. I also think it's really small. As you can see, it's really hard to see where it is. So what I usually do is I scale it up with general draw scale. So I do like, for example, 10. If you're still in unlit mode, you can switch to lit mode now. At the top toolbar you have lit mode. And as you can see, it actually looks kind of lit already. You can also switch to lightning only. And you only get the lightning. So it's just a very boring white ambient light you have right now. Doesn't really help the atmosphere. So we're going to edit its properties. We're going to change the lightning color and a couple of other things. You can double click the light. And then you can go to light and light component. And you have two sections. So start off with light component itself. And here you have the brightness. So for brightness, I'm using 0.5, because ambient light shouldn't be really bright. I mean, this would be really boring. So I'm using 0.5. Even 0.5 is fairly high, actually, but for this level, it will do. And in here, we can set the color. So this was the brightness. You have a lot of properties here, but you can pretty much ignore all of them. Usually you only end up using brightness and color and radius and things like that. So ignore all of it, focus on brightness, and then go to light color. If you click the magnify glass on the right, you can pick the color. So I'm going to go for some kind of bluish green, like this kind of color, and then remember to actually slide this down as well, because otherwise it stays white, as you can see. I'm going for something like this, I think. You can type over the numbers if you want to, but it doesn't really have to be super exact. Just some kind of blue. OK. And as you can see, it turns blue. Next thing we want to do, and this is a bit special about skylight, is if we go down to the second section, skylight component, you have a lower brightness as well. What a skylight basically does is, and you can see this inside, it only lights up the floor. It lights up the walls with like 50%, and ceilings are pitch black. If you were to raise a lower brightness, we also lit up the ceilings. So there are actually two lights into one. One light that comes from the sky and goes down, and one light that comes from the horizon basically and goes up. So in order to get a nice uniform ambient light going on, you need to make sure that you have the same value for both the normal light component as for the sky, the lower light. So I'm having a lower brightness is the same value as brightness, and then I have to make sure I have the same color as well in both. So for example, I can go back to the first one, light color, click the magnify glass again, and say add to custom color. So it appears here. And then here I can click the magnify glass again, select it, and OK. You could also manually enter these values if you want to, and etc. So various ways of doing it, or you can simply guess, because that doesn't have to be super exact. So now we have a very basic ambient light set. And next up would be the sunlight itself. I'm going to rotate the sky a little bit, because you can see this is obviously kind of the brightest spot in the sky. And I want the brightest spot in the sky to be on the side of the building, so there, instead of front facing. If I press spacebar once, so I'm in rotate mode now, rotating it. And I think this is better. If we do it like this, then we get a nice silhouette of these rocks with the sun behind them, and we get a nice shadow on the building, like this, that drops from the side. That's better than a light that hits the building from the front, fairly boring. Then the sky, the sun itself. So we go back to the actor classes, and this time we go to directional light. Again, you expand it, sorry, and in this case you want to have a dominant directional light. So not a normal one, but you want to have a dominant directional light. A dominant directional light gives stronger shadows, and that's really nice for a good strong sun. So we take a dominant directional light, move it away, and we right click somewhere, add dominant directional light. Then you move it up. Again, it doesn't matter where you place this one, it affects the entire level. So you can place it wherever you want, but again, I usually place it somewhere in the middle. And again, I also scale this one up, so it's easier to see. Was perhaps too much. Something like that. You can rotate it. So if you go into rotation mode, spacebar once, you can see the little arrow pointing off it. So that's the direction of the light. So I'm going for something like this, so I get a nice shadow cutting the building into half, kind of. And I'm rotating it a little like this as well. There we go, and then I'm going to edit its properties. So again, properties, double clicking it. You go to light, expand it again. You go to advanced light, to light component. And then you go to brightness. I go for, let's say, 3. So it's brighter. For example, this would be really bright, as you can see. So I'm going for 3, I think 3 will do. And then secondly, I'm going to change the light color again. So light color, clicking the magnify glass. And in this case, I will go for a color that matches the sky. So some kind of orangish color, kind of like this. Perhaps too much. Perhaps slightly more to yellow. That's really yellow actually. Kind of like that. As you can see, for example here, you can see the shadows appear and disappear, and it's kind of weird and messy. This is because the lighting you're seeing right now is preview lighting. And before lighting is final, it first has to be calculated. This is the same process as you're using for brushes. So if you change the brush, you will have to rebuild geometry to make the change show up or the change final, right? And for lighting it's very much the same. When you place a light, you can see it, but it's a bit messy and it's not entirely how it is supposed to be until you rebuild the lighting. By rebuilding lighting, it will get baked in geometry and it will be turned into light maps and all those kind of things. So that's the next step for us. We're going to bake the lighting into the level. And at the top, where you rebuild geometry, so you always use this cube to rebuild, you also have build lighting. So you can click that, get an options panel. Just leave default settings is fine, and you just press OK. And then it wants to connect, so it's my firewall. So yeah. What it will start up is Swarm and Swarm Agent. And the Swarm is like a distributed renderer. So if you were to have a network of PCs, or if you're in a development studio and you have like 50 computers in the building, you can use all of those computers. This is the Swarm renderer. You can distribute the lightning compile over all those computers. So that's what Swarm Agent is doing. It tries to connect to other computers in my network, and it tries to distribute the lightning compiling. If you don't have any other PCs, it's fine, it will do it by itself. I don't have any other PCs in my network, so this is just what it's doing on only my computer. And then it's done. You can close this one, we can move it away. You get two kinds of error messages. So these one we always got, we can ignore these for now. And then you also get the lightning errors. The light importance volume we can ignore for now, we will fix this later on. And this one is slightly weird, however, but appears to be an error in the mesh itself, I believe. So ignore that one as well. Doesn't look like you can actually do anything about that. And if you look in the level now, you can see there are no more disappearing shadows. Everything is nice and how it is supposed to be. Next you can place smaller lights, small lanterns. You can go to the content browser again and find yourself a nice lamp somewhere, an actual mesh. So I think I found one in neck lights, and there we have a mesh that looks like this. So this is a neck lights and it's called Turk Lamp 1. I'm going to add this against the pillar next to the door, and it's too small, so I'm going for a scale 2. I also have to rotate it. There we go, and this obviously doesn't really give any light right now. And we're going to place a light in front of it. So we can, we're going to add the normal standard light to it. So the ones we just added, these two, these are special ones. You don't have to select anything if you want to just add a normal light. That's what we're going to do. So we can just right click and add actor, add light, point. And move it up a bit more so it fits the resolution. So add actor, add point light. And then we get a very standard Omni light. We can position it in front of the light, in front of the lantern. And if you zoom out, you can see the radius of the light. So this is how far it can go. And same thing here, we're going to change the color, the intensity, the brightness. And in this case as well, the radius as well. We can double click it, get the properties, we go to light, go to light component, and light component again. I think it should be maybe 1.5 in brightness. And as you can see on the screenshots, I used blue lights because that's kind of nice. You have an orange light falling in from the sky and the sun, and then you have some bluish greenish lights down below as a counterbalance against the orange light here. So you have cold lighting here, warm lighting here, so that's nice. So I'm going to go for a kind of bluish light. You can even take the same lights as the ambient one we saved before, or you can just select any new color if you want to. Something like this. And as you can see, it gets blue. The radius is too big, so I think it should be smaller. The radius of a light can be edited in the next section. So I'm closing this section. And then go to point light component. And here you have radius. I think 160, I don't know, just trying around. 384 maybe. The fact that I'm going for values like 384, that's just my thing. There's absolutely no point really in going for 384. You can just as well go for 390. In case of a light, it really doesn't matter. But I'm so used to typing in nice values for brushes that I just end up typing the same kind of values for lights as well. But you really don't have to do it. You can just as well go for 400 if you want to. I think something around 350 to 400 will do. Still think it's maybe too dark, so I'm gonna raise the brightness some more. Maybe even to 4. Maybe even more. 5 I have right now. That might work. And we can see the lantern is yellow and the light is blue, so these two don't match. And to fix that, I made a second variation on the texture. So in the content browser, in the package E3D Intro to UDK content, in the to be used folder, I made well, actually it's an instance. So in the top menu, if you're using the filtering, make sure you have material instances turned on, or just select all. So this is a blue variant. So I'm going to replace this texture, this material, with this new variant instead, because it's blue. So I'm selecting it. We're going to do the same thing as we did with the sky. So I'm selecting the material in the content browser, and then I get the properties of the mesh. So I double click it. I go to static mesh actor, static mesh component, rendering, materials. I click the green plus, and then I simply click the green arrow. And there you go. The blue version is applied to it. Also for the lights, it would probably be a good idea to go to lightning and turn off cast shadow. And by turning off casting shadow, you're able to place the light inside the lantern, giving a more realistic lighting. So what I did is I took the properties of the lantern, I went to static mesh actor, static mesh component, lightning, and I turned off cast shadow, and I placed the light inside the lantern. I'm duplicating it now to the other side. So duplicating it again. And rotating it. Same for the other side. You made changes to the light, you place new lights, these. So every time you make changes to the light, you should rebuild at some point. So I'm going back to build lightning, and I'm building again. And it's done. Could be too bright. You can tweak it again later on. And then it's probably a good idea to actually start playing our level now. And the first thing you should do is to go to the top menu, view. So top menu, view, world properties, world info. And then you have game type for Pi, and Pi stands for play in editor. So this is the game type that will be used to play in the editor game, in the example game. So I'm going to select UT Deathmatch here, because I wanted to play like a Deathmatch level. I'm selecting Deathmatch as game type for Pi, and I close this again. And then we can simply right click somewhere on the floor, anywhere, and you can do like play from here, or you can do play level, play on PC, or play from here on viewport. So all of this works. That I'm going to do play from here on viewport because that fits the resolution of this video better. You can press escape. There you go. And you're back to normal. So that was your first test play. This only works, however, if you right click somewhere and you do take play from here. What you want to do ideally is to assign a default player location, default player start. And in order to do that, you can go to the actor classes. So I'm going to the content browser, switching to actor classes at the top. And in here you want to go to navigation point, you expand it, and you have player start. And you add it where you want the player to start by default. So I'm going to add it at the end of the balcony. I right click here, add player start here. And you get this icon. You can move it, place it in between. It will also look like it's floating. However, when you move it down, it will say bad size. You're not supposed to move it down. The default height is fine. And if you really want to snap to the floor, you can press the end key on the keyboard. So if I'm pressing end, it snaps to the floor. You can also see there's a little arrow, so it points this way. When the player starts, he will look into this direction. Not really ideal. I think you should look into that direction instead. So we can go into rotation mode, spacebar once, and we simply rotate the default viewing angle. Like that. And if we were to play now, it will take this location as the default location where to start from. We'll come back to gameplay things later on. For now, first, however, we're going to go back to visual things. Look at the screenshot, and this color you have is different from what we have in the screenshots. This looks a lot better than this. This is a bit, color is different, the color is not so pretty and seems less intense, etc. And that's because you don't have any post-processing applied. So what has happened in this level, in the real level, is that I use post-processing to bump up the bloom, to add some depth of field, to do color correction, and all kinds of those things. And that's what makes a level look really cool and really polished. And that's the thing we're going to do next. Before we can start with post-processing, there's one thing you should verify. So you can go to the content browser, and you can go to Effects. So Effects, expanding it, go to Hit Effects, Hit Effects, and there you make sure you have all selected. So at the top, if you had it like this, make sure you select all. And in the package Hit Effects, you're looking for UT Post Process, this one, Post Process Chain. So you have 3 of them, but you're looking for the normal one, not the console and not the menu, just normal one. You can double click it, a bit big. And for some reason, it appears to be that that by default, post processing is turned off in the editor. It works in game, but it's turned off in the editor, and that's not very handy actually. So we're going to turn it back on. So this is the chain of post processing. It's all pretty advanced, so don't worry too much. Just click on Uber Post Process Effect, and at the bottom, scroll all the way down, and you have a flag Show in Editor. So you can enable it, and that should be it. Closing it. And if you want to, you could right click the package and go for save. If you don't do this, you'll have to do it again next time you start up the editor. So I will do that. There we go. And then we can go back to the level. You can go to the top menu, View, World Properties again. So the same place where you configured the Pi game type. However, above it you have default post-process settings. You can expand it, And in here, there's loads of stuff to be configured. For example, we could say enable depth of field, DOF. And you get depth of field post-processing. At the top you have values. So you have a bloom scale. For example, I can raise this to 8 and you'll get more bloom. And so loads of numbers. I can't go explain every single number of this, and it would only end up in being an avalanche of information you can't remember. But in any case, you can mess with these and see what happens. And for example, the most important part of this actually are the scene highlights, scene midtones, and scene shadows. These 9 numbers, because these 9 numbers plus scene desaturation allow you to change the color of the scene, and that's exactly what has happened in this one, in the real level. Pretty much every level has its colors modified to post-processing through these 9 values. Turning off depth of field again, and I makes it hard to see anything. So for example, scene desaturation is 0 by default. If it were to be 1, it would just be gray. So what I usually do is I usually slightly desaturate the scene, like by 0.25. Because these are very harsh colors, it's a harsh contrast, so I slightly desaturate the scene, and then you recolor it with another color. So it gets a bit more consistent and those kind of things. These midtones, shadows and highlights, these are the colors. So this is RGB, red, green, blue. This is very much the same like if you tweak a TV or a monitor, you can increase the amount of red in the screen or decrease the amount of green in the screen, and it alters the entire look. This is very much the same, except it has been, you have 3 different groups. These takes all the bright pixels, these all the mid-tone pixels, the pixels in between, and these all the dark pixels. So you're able to change the color per brightness of the pixel, dependent on the brightness of the pixel basically. You can mess around. For example, I can enter 2 here, and it gets more green, as you can see. And for example, I can do the same here. It gets very yellow. So you can play around with these numbers, just mess around, enter something, and this gets more orange, as you can see. So you can really do funny things with this. And for example, it gets a bit dark like this. So mess around and see what you end up with. Same here. Now it gets very contrasted. That's also a thing. If you were to, if you increase all the numbers to 2, it gets darker. If you bring them to 0.5, it gets brighter and you get more contrast. So you can also use these values to alter the brightness and the contrast of a scene, and not just the color. It's very fun stuff to play with, I think. Because you can dramatically alter the look of a level in just with just a few presses, basically. I can tell you the values that I used for my level. You don't have to use those, it depends on yourself what you want to use, but this is what I did. I used a bloom scale of 0.5. It's a bit more bloom on the windows, you can see. That's cool. I used the DOF kernel size, so the blur kernel size of 128. This will also wash out the bloom a bit more. In the first place, actually, I enabled the DOF, depth of field, like that. And you can see that the kernel size, it is how wide the blurring is. The higher the value, the more it is blurred. I'm using 128, and I'm using an inner radius of 8,000, about 8,000. There we go. So everything within the first 8,000 units of your position as a player that is not being blurred by depth of field. And next up, the maximum blur. So the maximum far blur is 1 now. I'm bringing it down to 0.5. And by doing so, I get a bit of a mix between sharp and blurred. I mean, if it's 0, it would be all sharp. If it's 1, it would be all blurred. And if it's 0.5, it's a mix of both. Then, of course, I have the scene desaturation at 0.25. So the colors are less harsh. And then I'm going to change the color of the scene. So I used, for the highlights, on X 0.5. I used 0.75 on Y. And I used 0.5 on Z. Like that. For the midtones, I used I left X and Y on 1 by default, and I used 1.5 on Z, like that. And for the shadows, I used really small values. I used 0.03 for X, minus 0.0005 for Y, and minus 0.02 for Z. So you can also subtract colors if you go with a negative number. You can close the world info now. And as you can see, this actually looks a whole lot more like the screenshots already. So the post-processing is a really powerful feature in Unreal, and it really allows you to style a level tremendously, basically. Then we're going to do the corridor inside. Going to go back to a bit of a mesh placing, and we also still have the pools left. There's no water inside yet. You can go to the content browser again. Go to environments. I'm using a kind of arch for inside. I'm going to switch back to unit mode as well. It's easy to see things. So in neck trims, I'm using these walls for both the balcony as for inside the corridor. So this is in neck trims SM plane STRA. It's a very simple little wall. And if you want to, you can already place it. So placing it in the corridor, and I'm lining it up with the door frame. I'm duplicating it a few times. It sticks out, doesn't really matter all that much. Selecting it all and then duplicating it to the other side. Then I'm also selecting my door frame and the doors itself. I'm duplicating those as well, and I'm moving them back to the other end of the corridor. So we have a second door at the end. Next up, I still need my arch I'm still looking for. So next ceilings is a big mesh like this. It's called Turk 182A. And I'm using that for the ceiling with a scale of 0.75. It's too big, as you can see, so scaling it back to 0.75. And I'm moving it back. You can see the door, it nicely fits. And then I'll just duplicate it a couple of times. So that's once. I can select both of them and duplicate both of them. Speeds it up a little bit. There we go. Actually, it would be better, because right now it aligns to the end. And I have a little hole in between the front door and the pillar. So it would be better if I were to align this to the front door instead. And actually the arch is also hidden in the brushes. Also pretty bad. So I'm going to move the arch a little bit as well. Then I can simply move the door a little bit at the end and resize the brush as well. The brush is also too high, so I'm also lowering it. This is easier than trying to scale these meshes and trying to make it fit the length of the corridor. So rebuilding geometry, and fixed. We have a little corridor. I have lights inside. So we can go to the content browser, go to lights, and I'm using this one inside as a light source. So it's called a free light 1. Adding it somewhere, and it's too big. So I used scale. There we go, duplicating it a few times. I'm going to be placing it on every second set of arches, like this. So I have 2 empty ones and 2 with a lamp. So otherwise I think there would be too much light going on. Then we want to add lights to them. So last time we did right click, add actor, add light. But however, we can also hold down the L key on the keyboard. So simply hold down L from light, and click. And everywhere where you click, you will get a new light. So this is definitely the fastest way of adding lights. So I have a light now, switching to lit mode. And I'm going to be placing 1 light on each side of the lamp. A very weak light. So in this case, I think the icon is really big. So I'm using draw scale to make it a little bit smaller. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place 4 lights. So 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. So covering the entire lamp on each side. And then I'm going to be placing a spotlight below the lamp. All the lights are static. It's S from static. And that means they're baked in a geometry. So if you want to, you can have 1 million lights. I really wouldn't use 1 million lights, but technically it's possible to use a lot of lights and it will not impact performance. Because lightning is baked into the geometry and it's static lightning. So the number of lights doesn't really impact performance. I go into the properties of this one, double clicking it, light component. Again, I go for a kind of weak brightness, I think, 0.5. And I go for a light color, it's kind of orangish. Something like that, or maybe 1 is good, 1 brightness. And then I go to point light component. And I go to the radius. And you can see it's still quite large. I want it to be really small and simple. I only wanted to light up the wall here. So the geometry directly surrounding the lamp. Not much more than that. I think even smaller perhaps. 224, so something like 200 will do. And then I duplicate it to the other side. So it's kind of on every side of the lamp. And then we want to add a spotlight below. So a spotlight is yet another type of light. So you can go back to the actor classes. So content browser, actor classes tab. You go to light. Go to spotlight. And you want to have the top one. You don't want to have any of these. You want to have the normal main spotlight. Selecting that. And last few times we did right click, add spotlight here, etc. But however, you can also hold down the A key on the keyboard, so A, and while holding down A, you simply click somewhere and it will add the currently selected actor. So I have a big spotlight. Again, I think the icon is really large, so I'm scaling it down a little bit and placing it below. And I'm going to, in the properties again, to light component. I'm increasing the brightness to like 5 or something, and I'm changing the color to a similar orange, kind of. And then we can go to spotlight component, and there we can change the cone angle. So I think it should be bigger, so it also lights up the little walls a little bit. Because this would be too small. As you can see, I think it's better if it also lights up the walls a little bit. Something like this. And then we can try a rebuild. Trying a rebuild. Build lightning. And when it's done, you can see that it completely messed up. So you get a completely different result than the preview lightning. It's a lot brighter. And that's because when you do a light rebuild, it calculates radiosity, global illumination, all those kind of things. So it will calculate light hitting a surface, bouncing around, and thereby the radius grows. Because light bounces around, it's able to reach angles and travel further away from the light than the preview lightning showed you. So because of that, this actually looks quite ugly right now. It's really bright and really bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that most lights, so the 4 lights on each corner, that those 4 lights are not able to have their lightning bounce around in the corridor. So I'm selecting all four, I'm pressing F4 to go to the properties, light component, and I have light mass. So light mass is the system that calculates all the global illumination lighting and radiosity and all the light bouncing and all those kind of things. So expanding that, and then it's a bit hard to see. Still is. And then you have indirect lighting scale. So I'm going to bring this down, and by bringing this down, I will make sure the light can't bounce around as much and make the entire corridor way too bright. By changing this, you could see that it went back to how it looked. So it goes back to the preview lighting, and it's a bit messed up. As you can see, this is really bright, this is dark. So this is all because we modified the light, and by modifying a light, we are going back to preview lighting. So I went to 0.1 for indirect lighting scale in light mass section. And I only did that for the 4 lights surrounding the lamp. I didn't do it for the spotlight itself. So we can try again, see if this helped. And it's still very bright, as you can see. So it's probably a good idea to do the same thing for the spotlight as well. So you can do that. So properties of a spotlight, double clicking it, light component, light mass. You expand light mass settings, and same here, indirect lighting scale, bringing it down to 0.1 as well. And then we can try again. And that's better, I think. So now we can copy these lights to the other lamp, selecting them, and then loading it to the other side. And now we have a nice corridor with a nice variation in lighting. It goes from bright to dark to bright to dark again. So that's nice. It's nice if not the entire corridor is just filled with light and it's just one big source of light. It's nice if you have some variation going in color and brightness. That's good. There are a couple of other meshes here that we have to place. So back to the content browser and going to the package for this level, E3D Intro to UDK content. And here I made a couple of sand meshes, like these. Very simple meshes. It's just basically a curved plane and that's it. Same here. So you can use these 3 and simply place them around a little bit. For example, I take the first one, sand 1, and I'm going to place it in one of the pools. And this is just a very extremely cheap way of getting rid of this very flat sand. And what we were basically going to do is simply add a couple of meshes on top, like this, that have the same texture, and that will make sure that the surface looks a bit more varied, break up the flatness basically. So it's a very cheap way of working, but it works. And if you would want to do it better, then the best way would probably be to make a unique static mesh in a 3D modeling program that fits this shape and that has some goes up and down, is a bit more varied than just a flat surface. Something like that. Doesn't have to be very exact. I'm also going to do that on these areas. So again, it's very flat and empty. So I'm adding a bit of sand here as well, like this. There you go. So it's very simple. You can just place around as many as you like, just to demonstrate the entire idea. Next up, we will have to do the little walls around the balcony, because you can fall off right now. It's not very nice. So I'm going to be adding walls all around. And the walls I used for this are... And it are the same walls we used for the corridor inside. So these, just a simple small walls. It's called plane STRA. And I also used the corner pieces. These, plane cur D. Just a 90-degree turn, basically. And going to add those to the level. So I selected the corner, adding it, and then I'm selecting the long straight piece, adding it as well, and then I'm going to line it up. So placing it on the side, I'm also going to take the shorter version, this one. So it's basically the same, except it's shorter than the long one, strb. It will fit this space better. Selecting all the parts and mirroring them to the other side. Transform on Y. And selecting the short piece again. And using the short piece to fill up this little gap. Scaling it to 0.75. Seems to kind of do it. Small gap remaining, but I'm just going to select all these meshes now and move them closer again. One thing we forgot at the top is that there is a light attached to this panel, show you in the screenshot. So we can quickly add this light as well. And also there are lights, it's hard to see on the screenshots, but there are lights on top of every pillar as well. So there's a light here, a light attached to the pillar as well and on top of the pillar. So we can quickly copy paste those around. To begin with, the light on top of the tower, that is neck lights, and I use this one. So wall light 1, adding that one. It's too small, scaling it up a little bit, 1.5 perhaps, and I'm going to duplicate the light I used for this one. So I select the light, copy paste it up, and that's it. And then I'm also going to add this light on top of every pillar. I take one of the pillars, I add it, I rotate it. There we go. Again, I copy paste the light I already made once. I think the radius is fairly large, so I'm going to scale it down. Instead of scaling it down with the numbers in the property, we can also switch to scale mode like this and simply click and drag. So that's also an option, etc. You can also add them on the other ones. But I think you get the point by now. And we should move on to water. So these are supposed to be pools of water, and we haven't touched these yet. The first thing actually you should know is that water is made up of 3 different things. First of all, you have a mesh, and the mesh is just a visual surface of the water. So it's just a flat mesh with a nice material applied. And then you have a water volume. The water volume is like a box that identifies what's water. So everything inside the box is going to be treated with water physics. So a water volume makes sure that you drown in the water if you stay below the water too long, and the fact that you can simply swim, so there is no gravity. Then we also have a post-process volume. So if you go below the water, we want everything to get more blurry and more blue, and that's done through a post-process volume. So we're going to make those 3 things now to begin with. First of all, we're going to make the water surface itself. So we can go to the content browser and then go to the package for this level, E3D Intro to UDK content, to the to be used one. And there we have a simple plane mesh. So it's really just a plane, very boring. And that's the one we're going to add. So we selected this one, adding it here, and I'm moving it to where the water should be, roughly. I think something like this will work. And then I scale it. I scale it like 3 perhaps, or perhaps that's too much, maybe 2.5, 2.5. And I make sure it doesn't stick out. This would be bad. We don't want to have water here. So I make sure it fills up the pool entirely, but it doesn't stick out anywhere. So this is good. Applying the water material. So you have the mesh selected. Go to the content browser. And you make sure materials are turned on, visible. And you find yourself a water material. So you have water small, matte. Looks like this. So selecting this, and we're going to apply this to the mesh. So double clicking it to get the properties, static mesh actor, static mesh component, rendering, and again materials, click the green plus and add it. You can see that on one side of the water it's bright, so make sure that the bright side is rotated towards the sky. So if it looks like this for you, make sure you rotate the bright side to the sky. So it's a faked reflection. The reflection is just an image blended in the material, and that's it, but it works. Also handy to know is if you, on the top left of the toolbar you have real time. It's a little joystick. if you press that, then you can see the animations of whatever you're looking at. Next, the volumes. So we'll start off with the water volume, so we have actual physics. To make a volume, you need to have your red builder brush again. So I'm pressing B to unhide the red brush. I'm going to reset it to just a normal size. And then I make sure that the top face of the brush lines up with the water sheet, the water plane. Then I make sure that, just like the water plane, that this completely covers the entire pool. So everything inside this brush is going to be treated as water. So you make sure that everything that we want to have water, so the entire pool, is completely inside the brush. It can stick out, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure that the pool is completely inside this brush. There we go. And then we simply add a water volume. And to add a water volume, you go to the left toolbar and you have this button. It says add volume. So we're going to right click it. And it doesn't really fit the resolution. So I'm going to collapse a couple of things. So you can right click this button, you get a big list of volumes you can add. All of these volumes are doing things. For example, you have a gravity volume, will alter the gravity in the level. A foliage factory is a volume that will automatically scatter small meshes around. For example, you can have a grass growing on another mesh like this. And all of these do different things. We need to have a water volume. Unfortunately, it's off the resolution, but it's the last one in the list, says UT water volume. So I click that, and I'm going to re-expand these things. I click that, and when you would move away the red brush, you can see that there's a pink brush below it. If you can't see a pink brush, it may have be that you have pressed O on the keyboard. As you can see, O toggles volumes on and off. So if you can't see anything, you may have pressed O. So this volume is actually a brush, but it's invisible. It doesn't have a surface. It's just a wireframe, basically. And everything inside this volume, everything inside this pink brush is going to be water. You don't have to change any properties, so closing it. Just like this, the default values. Next up, we want to do the post-process volume. So we take a red brush again. I'm going to move it back up. Again, you make sure that the top face matches the water plane. And a trick I usually do is to expand the bottom a little bit. So it's not exactly the same height as the water volume, because that would make it harder to select it later on. And then we're going to add the post-process volume instead. Again, the volume button, you right click it, and you go for post-process volume. Click it, and then you move the red brush away, because it prevents you from selecting the volume. As you can see, we now have two pink brushes. And the bottom one is the post-process volume. So as soon as you enter this volume, you can see the color changes. So remember, a while ago we went to View, World Properties, World Info, Default Post-Process Settings, and we changed all these numbers to change the bloom, the depth of field, and the color, etc. By entering this volume, you go back to the default settings for this volume. So this volume actually allows you to change the color on a per zone basis. So we can determine, okay, this area in the level, this has to have this post-process settings, and this area has to have these other settings. So it's possible to, for example, if you're inside a building, to color the inside of the building with a warmer reddish, more red color, and have a more up-close depth of field. And when you leave the building, you switch to another post-process volume, where you have where the depth of field is much further away and the color is much colder. So it's possible to do those kind of things, and we're going to abuse that system for the water. So as soon as you enter the water, we want the screen to become very blurry and very blue. So you select the post-process volume and you get the properties of it. So F4 or right-click post-process volume properties, etc. And then in the properties you go to post-process volume and you go to settings. And this is exactly the same as you found in View World Properties. And restore the view. So again, we do the same kind of settings here. We enable depth of field. And we're going to bring the depth of field range much closer by. So let's say we bring this to 128. You can see it gets more blurry now. So this is kind of the effect you want to have. When you're in the water, your view should become more blurry. We can raise the bloom some more, for example. And again, same thing, just mess around and see what you end up with. To make the scene more blue, however, I am going to use shadows. Scene shadows. The X should be 0.025. You can see it gets more blue already. And Y, I use a setting of 0.01. On the midtones, I used 2 for X and left the other ones on 1. And for the highlights, I used an X75, 0.75. Also important, scene desaturation 0.25 and scene interpolation duration 0.1 or something. The scene interpolation duration is how long it will take to fade from this to this upon entering the volume. So if this is 1, then it will take 1 second for the screen to fade over and to adjust to these new settings. And since it's water, we want the screen to adjust near instantly, so 0.1 second to adjust the screen. You can select the water plane and also the 2 volumes. So I selected both volumes and the plane, and I'm going to clone it to the other side. There we go. I'm also going to mirror it. So right click transform on Y. And now we have 2 pools of water. Next, we're going to add a couple of particles. So again, I'm in the package E3D Intro to UDK content. I'm in the folder to be used. And I make sure that at the top I have particle systems selected for all. I have now looking for the particles. You can see this is a particle system. It says so. Particle system. And if you double click it, you open up the particle editor. So you open up the particle editor, and well, all of this is a bit too advanced, so ignore all of that. But the most important thing for now is that you can preview the particle here. So these are just a bunch of rings expanding, and we're going to be adding this on top of the water. So it looks like there's water flowing into the pool. You can close it. Make sure the particle is selected here. Go to the level and right click the water. Add actor. And it's almost off screen, I think. So let's do it again. Right click, add actor, add emitter, water ring par. So this is the one we have selected in the content browser. Add it. You can see an icon showing up. And this is the source of the particle. If you now turn on real-time preview, so the little joystick up here, you can see the particle in action. So I can click away, and you can see you have some big rings expanding, and it looks like water is flowing into the pool. So I can select this particle and simply move it around. I'm going to press it into the side like this. Also copying it to the other side. Also, when I enter this pool, my screen doesn't change color, but the post-process volume doesn't seem to be active. This is because I copied this. So I selected these volumes and this water plane, I copied to the other side, but now the other side doesn't appear to work. That's because these are actually brushes, and because you changed the brushes, you should rebuild to make the change definite. So you have to rebuild geometry, and now it should work correctly. Remember that every time you rebuild the light, you will get this error, no light importance volume found. We're going to make one now. What a light importance volume actually is that it's a volume as well, and everything inside that volume receives the most attention in the lightning compile process. So basically it cuts the level into 2, and it allows you to create a high detail lightning area and an area that requires less detail. So in this case, the entire playable area is supposed to be a high detail area, and the entire forest down there, it is not really supposed to get very accurate lightning. So we get our red builder brush, and we're going to make a box that's about as big as the playable level. Kind of like that. And then on the left side, we go to the volume button again, right click it, and this time we go for a light mass importance volume. Click it, and when you would move the cube away, you get this yellow brush. So everything inside this yellow brush will receive high detail lightning. Everything outside this brush receive low detail lighting. This will speed up the compile process a lot. And another type we were going to make is a blocking volume. And a blocking volume is basically just an invisible collision box. So it allows you to create boundaries to the level. And we don't want a player to be able to jump over the wall and just fall down. And it also goes for the rocks. We don't want someone to end up on this place. So I'm going to make a big blocking volume to block this off. So you can't jump on this. And we also don't want people to get on top of the rocks. So we're going to place blocking volumes all around the level to make sure that people can't actually leave this area. This is done in much in the same way. So we select the red builder brush. But, it's a bit too big. I'm going to reset it to just a cube. There we go. And I'm going to enter the size manually. In this case, we'll go faster. I think 1024 high. And I'll stick to that, just the high cube. Placing it next to the side. Lining this face up with the side. Raising it as well. There we go. And then extending it. And then you go to the left. And you go for blocking volume. So right click the volume button once again. And you go for blocking volume. And if you were to move the red brush now, you can see there's another pink brush below. This is an invisible collision, so you can't actually go through this volume. It blocks you, but it's completely invisible. It doesn't cast a shadow. It's just a collision box. We'll do the same thing for the other side. And again, blocking volume. We also do the same thing for the front. The cube is too big for this pretty small space, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if it sticks over or anything like that. So blocking volume again. So I covered the entire balcony now. And then I'm going to do the same thing for these. Extending it. I'm not doing this entire curve here. It doesn't have to be super perfect. It's just an invisible collision, so no one. It's very unlikely that anyone will notice this. We can work pretty messy. There we go. And then the other side. I don't even bother to perfectly align this to the wall. I just guess, kind of. And blocking volume. And I think we have all the volumes we need. I think this is good. If you want to see how it looks in game, you can also press the G on top. And that will hide all the actors and all the volumes and all the wires and everything that you can't see in game. So it gives a nice, accurate preview. So it's a G on top. It's also G on the keyboard. Same thing. Next up, we have a couple of birds. We have birds flying over the building. This is particle. So we're going to be placing this particle. And we also have a sun, which is actually a big fat lens flare. And we're also going to be placing that lens flare. So first for the birds, we go to the content browser. And we go to the package for this level. So E3D intro to UDK content. To the to be used one. We make sure particles is on, so we can see particle systems. And then we go for, see if we can find it. The first one, birds par. So the birds particles. So we select this one. We move it aside. It will be best to add it on top of the tower. So I'm going to add it here. Right clicking. It's a bit off the resolution. So right clicking, add actor, add emitter. And if we press real-time preview, we should be able to see birds in a moment. The birds are going to be way too small. You can see they're way too small. You can't just scale meshes, you can also scale particles. So we can do scale 6 on a particle system, and that will get us bigger birds. So I'll position the particle behind the tower. We can perhaps slightly rotate it, so the birds fly a little bit diagonal. We have a bird flying over, another one there. It's very simple, but it works. And just planes sliding over through the air with an animated texture on top. Next, the sun. So again, you go back to the content browser and make sure you select all. So we select all, and then you see you have a lens flare. It's called flare sun LF. So you select this one, and then you go to these rocks, you right click one of them, so off the resolution again, right click one of them, add actor, add lens flare. As you can see, you get a lens flare. Position this roughly where the sun should be, and you have a nice lens flare. There's actually one thing I forgot to mention earlier on in the video, and that is if you're having difficulties selecting the lens flare. I can't select it right now, as you can see. And this also goes for other translucent surfaces, for example the water. If I can't select the water. So if you're having those kind of troubles, then you're missing a property at the top of the top toolbar. You have this, allow translucent selection. So if you enable this, then you can select the sun and you can select the water and other translucent surfaces. So if you're having difficulties selecting those, make sure this is enabled at the top. Allow translucent selection. Next, we can animate the door. So to animate the door, I'm going to copy it like this, and I'm going to place it in front of it, or perhaps even in the corridor. Let's place it in the corridor. This is just as a test. I'm going to make these doors animate just as a test. I'm going to make them slide into the wall. It's easy to first explain how to make a door slide than how to make a door rotate around. So I'm starting with an easy example, and then we'll do the rotating doors. The first thing you should do, because these are static meshes, you can see it down here at the bottom, static mesh, and in wireframe they're bluish green, so they're static meshes. But a static mesh can't move because it says static mesh, right? So the first thing you want to do is convert these over to a dynamic type of mesh, an interp actor. So you can right click them, and then you have transform somewhere, or convert even. So convert, and then convert it to a mover. An interp actor and a mover is the same thing, but both names are used. So we're converting it to a mover, and movers, as you can see, two interp actors selected, are able to move. In wireframe they're purple. So purple meshes are able to move. And now we can go into Kismet and animate this. And so I will talk you through Kismet, a basic introduction to Kismet now, and how we can animate these doors in Matinee. First thing you should do is open up Kismet. So at the top toolbar you have a green K, open Kismet, and you get a window like this. This is Kismet, and this is like a scripting, visual scripting sub-editor in the engine. So you can right click the empty space somewhere, and then you can pick new things to add. So for example, you don't have to do this, but just a quick example. On level loaded, you can destroy an actor. So you can combine, you can add new actions and new events, new conditions, and then connect all of them by connecting the wires. And by doing that, you can create entire chains of actions and things that happen in the level and things that are checked for and all those kind of things. So it's a simple visual scripting language almost that aims on level scripting. I can delete these again, and we can do the Matinee. So what we should do is, while the door is selected in the viewport, you can right click New Matinee. There you go. And this Matinee thing, this will hold the animation that the door will play. So you can double click it, and you get yet another editor. I'll move this one out of the way for a moment. There you go. So you have yet another editor, and here we can add the mover and set the animation keys. So the first thing to do is in the dark gray area, this one, right click, and you can go for new empty group. It will ask for a name. You can enter a name if you want to. I'll just click OK. There you go. And then you want to add this as a movement track. So you right click the new group one you made, right click it, new movement track, and you get a movement track. You can simply click somewhere in here, click and drag, and you can move the timeline. So this is the timeline. You start at 0 seconds, and it ends at 5 seconds. So this red line, that's the end of the sequence. You can move the red line if you click it and simply drag. I'll go back to the default 5.5, and this is a key. So there's a very it's a dark red triangle. If you click it, this is the key. This is a position it remembered. So this is this position. It's the first position, and what we're going to do now is add another position, and then it will automatically go from the first position to the second position. So what we can do is we can place the timeline, for example, at the end. So you simply click the darker gray area at the bottom. This is the timeline. This is the current moment in time. So you move it to the end, and then you're going to add a button, add a key, sorry. So at the top left, you have a button, add key. This one. So click, and you get another one of those triangles, as you can see. And while this one is highlighted, so not like this, but like this, so it's highlighted, you move the door in the viewport. So clicking and dragging, and where you let go, that position is being remembered. So as you can see, it's remembered it, and you can see the path the mover is going to take in the viewport. So if I move the timeline, you can see that it remembered the path. You can put the timeline back at the beginning and then press play at the top. And as you can see, it moves. If you are having troubles with this, so we can do it again for the other door, just as example. So back to Kismet, and we'll do it again for the other one, and I can show you what may go wrong. So selecting the other half, right clicking again, new matinee, double clicking it, and then I deselect it, and this is wrong. This is what I want to show you. So if you have deselected the mesh that is supposed to move while making the new group and making the movement track, you can't actually add a key. You get an error. And it doesn't really help anymore. I mean, you can go select it now, but it doesn't really help at all. You still get the same error. So it's really important that you have the mover, the door that you want to move, selected before making the group. So again, I select it, then I make the group and the movement track, and then I do have a default key. I move the timeline to the end. I add another key, add key, and while this key is highlighted, I can move this door, and a path shows up. If you want to modify a certain position later on again, you can click the key again and highlight it again, and while it's highlighted, you can move it again, and it will remember what you do. And that's it. The next thing we should do is make sure that both of these are starting to play. So we have a play input, but we have nothing to connect it to. So we need to create something that we can connect to play, some kind of event, something that happens. When this happens, you must start playing the doors. And we're going to make a trigger for that. So you can move Kismet out of the way, or you can close it if you want to, and first make a trigger. So I'm clicking the floor in front of the doors, and I right click it, and I go for add actor. It's off the resolution again. Try it again. So right click, add actor, add trigger. And this is a trigger. If you press C on the keyboard, you can see all the collision of everything, but it also shows the collision of the trigger. So this is the current radius of this trigger, and it's fairly small. So you want to increase the size of this trigger a little bit. You can double click it to go to the properties, and then go to trigger at the bottom, cylinder component, and then cylinder component again. And here you have the height and the radius. So if we change these values, the trigger becomes bigger. Then close this again. and then we can return to Kismet. So while this is selected in the viewport, it's really important to keep it selected here. Go back to Kismet, so the green K at the top, and right click somewhere in the empty space, and we will see that the trigger has shown up in the menu. So now you have a new object var using trigger 0 or a new event using trigger 0. We want to have an event because we want the trigger to do something. So new event using trigger 0 on touch. And then we can click and drag the little box and click and drag the box to connect to play. Same here, click, drag, let go, and we've made 2 connections. So when this is touched by the player, it will output these actions, and it will connect to play, and in play the matinee will play this animation. That's a very basic setup. We can try to play this in game. So I'm right clicking, play from here, play in the viewport, and I'm going to walk to the door now and it should open. There you go. Doesn't close again, that's normal. We didn't configure it to do so. So that was the example. So now let's do it for the real door. I'm going to delete these 3. It will complain that the fact that it's referenced in Kismet. I will continue anyway. And then I go to Kismet and select all of these. Again, you hold down Ctrl Alt and you drag. It's the same like in 2D viewports. And you delete everything. And then let's do the same thing for the real doors. One problem with the real door, however, is that if you select it, you can see that the pivot point is here. So if you want to rotate this, then it would rotate the wrong way. So that's a thing we should fix first. We should move the pivot point and thereby also the rotation point to this side. In order to do that, we can double click the door, get its properties, and you go to display. And there you have a section pre-pivot. And the pre-pivot allows you to offset the original pivot point by this many units. So I think it should be, let's just try it. Obviously not that. I think 64 on this, 128, and there we go. So I entered 128 on X, as you can see, and I thereby offsetted the original pivot point 128 units on X, and it ends up on this side. And that's what we want to have. Because if we want to rotate this door now, then we can simply do it like this. And that's good. So we do the same thing on the other side. We also enter 128 there. And then we have to move it back. And there we go. Next, we're going to animate these in Kismet again. Actually, we can do the trigger first. You can start with that. So you right click the floor in front of the door. Add actor. Add trigger. Then you can press C to see the collision. And it's a bit small, as you can see. So double clicking it. Trigger. Cylinder component again. And then the radius, something bigger. Something like this perhaps. Maybe a bit higher as well. Just make sure it's big enough so it reaches the staircase. Pressing C again. And then we go to Kismet. So we have the trigger selected in the viewport, as you can see. We go to Kismet, green K at the top. Make the window a bit smaller. Green K at the top. You right click somewhere. New event using trigger 1, which is the one we have selected. Touch. Then we move it away a little bit. We select one of the 2 doors. We selected the door. And in Kismet we right click again, new matinee. Double clicking it. And we go for new empty group. Just any name. We select new group, we right click that one, new movement track. And you can see that I actually forgot to convert it into an interp actor. So that's also something to be careful of. In this case it's warning me, are you sure you want to do this? No. So we're going back to the level, we close matinee, we can close Kismet as well. And as you can see, you can only animate purple meshes, not these greenish blue ones. So I select both of them, right clicking them, convert to mover. It says it's reference because I just did, I just made a matinee with it. Just go continue. There we go, and then back to Kismet. So I have the door selected, one door half, going to Kismet, and double clicking it again, and we continue. So right click, new movement track, and adding a new key at the end. So I'm moving the timeline to the end, clicking in this area, and adding a key, added a key, and while the key is highlighted, I'm going to move the door. I'm actually going to rotate the door, not just move the door. I will simply rotate it now. Something like that. And if I were to play the matinee, you can see that it actually nicely rotates. So this is what we want to have. We added the key at the end, we rotated the door, and remembered this position. Next, we also want to do it for the other door. And in the previous example, I made another matinee, but we can, however, also merge the other door into this existing matinee. So we select the other door, selected the other door half, and then I make a new group below the first one. So again, right click, new empty group, and add new movement track. And we do the same thing again. You place a timeline at the end, you make sure that this one is selected, movement, and you press add key. This is highlighted. While it's highlighted, move it, rotate it. And if you play this, the door nicely opens. That's cool. We can close matinee, go back to Kismet, and we can connect these two. We can move a node, if you click it and you hold down Control on the keyboard and you drag it around. So hold down Control and click and drag. So we click the little touched, click, drag, let go. If you would connect it to the wrong one, for example, I also connected it to this one and I want to disconnect it, we can right click a little one of those squares, break all links. We can do it again, change there, right click, break all links. What you can also do is hold down the Alt key and clicking the square. You could also click the line. So hold down the Alt key and simply click it. Will disconnect something. We can test this in game, and that works. We can also make the door close again. So let's do that. Go back to Kismet. Click the trigger, and you can see the properties down here. You can look for max trigger count and enter 0 instead. And next up, hook up untouched with reverse. So on touch, play, but if you leave the trigger, then it's untouched, so you reverse the door. That's basically it. And the 1 here stands for the number of times that you can trigger the trigger, and 0 stands for infinitive. So it was 1 by default, but that means you can only touch the trigger once, and after that it becomes deactivated. So we have 0 instead. We can play it again. The doors open. I'm now leaving the trigger. Close again. And they open again. We can close Kismet. And we can add a weapon. So you go to the actor classes. And then you go to a navigation point. And you go to UT Pickup Factory. UT Pickup Factory. And there you have the items. So you have weapons, you have health, and armor and some other things. So for example, jump boots. I expanded this, and you have jump boots here. So I have this selected. I go to the viewport, right click, add jump boots here. I can add a couple of other things as well. So for example, you can do a UT weapon pickup factory, adding that one. And if you double click this, in the properties in UT weapon pickup factory, you can select the weapon to have. You can select a rocket launcher. I can also add some ammo while I'm at it. So UT item pickup factory, ammo, rocket launcher ammo. And then we can play it again. In the same way, you can also add other things, armor, some health, etc. I will also give you a quick introduction to sound in Unreal. I'm going to be adding a wind sound. You can go to the actor classes, to the content browser even. So you go to the content browser and you go down to sounds. There we go. In here we have a couple of sound packages. We have, for example, ambient loops. And these are all sounds. Make sure you have all selected on the top, otherwise they won't show up. So these are sounds. You can select one of these. If you double click them, you can hear them. Probably you can't hear them on the video probably, but if you double click them, they will play. So select something. I will select just the wind. And then go to the actor classes. And you can go to, for example, I think we can even do it faster than this. I think we can even do this. Yeah, so you can also simply right click somewhere, add actor, add ambient sound, non-loop or simple toggleable. In this case you want to have simple one loops. This one wouldn't loop, and this one is meant to be toggled through Kismet. If we don't want to have either of these, we just want to have a simple looping sound. So add ambient sound simple, this one. And if you now press the real-time preview one button, you should be able to hear the wind. You can also double click this to get its properties and then expand ambient sound simple, and again. And there you can set a couple of properties. For example, you can raise the volume. I can enter 2. I don't know if you can hear that in the video, but in any case, the volume is louder. You can see the radius. It's a big blue sphere around it. So that's the radius. You can change the radius through these values. For example, it has an inner and an outer radius. So if you're inside the inner radius, the sound will be played at full volume. And beyond the inner radius, the sound will softly die out. It will fall off. You can also change the pitch. So if you change the pitch to 2, the sound will speed up. Or if you change to 0.1, for example, perhaps too low, 0.5, you will get a lower sound. So those are a couple of things you can play with. I'll delete this again for now. We also want to add sounds to the doors. So when a door opens, you want to have a sound playing. And that's done through Kismet. So that's a little different. But you can first select the sound we want to use. So I can go to the content browser. And then we have ambient sounds non-loop. Or perhaps we also have A movers we can use. So let's use movers. And in movers you have 2 different types. This is a sound cue. And a sound cue is basically simply a sound that has a couple of properties predefined for it. For example, it may have been predefined that the sound loops, or it may have been predefined what volume the sound is, etc. So it's a bit more like it's like a material and a texture. A texture is inside the material, and the material is like the further use of the texture, further implementation. For Kismet, however, you can only use cues. You can't use normal sounds. It must first be a cue. So we'll focus on these cues. And we'll just take something that looks interesting. This one maybe doesn't really matter. Find something nice. So again, it must be a cue, not a normal sound. Select the cue, and then we go to Kismet. So I'm moving this away while it's selected. Opening Kismet at the top. And then you right click somewhere. New action. Sound. Play sound. And the target is one of the two movers. Doesn't matter which one, just one of the two. So you hook up the target to there and you let go. And then you hook up touched to play. Like that. Then you click the sound. So you click it so you get the properties at the bottom. And you have play sound, and this is the actual sound it should play. So while we have the cue selected in the content browser, we click the green arrow and it takes over the selection, as you can see. That's good. So if you now touch this trigger, it will also send this signal, the enable signal, activate signal to play sound, and it will play this sound once. We can also do this with untouched if you want to. So that both when you touch the trigger and when you untouch it, the sound is being played. We have pretty much come to the end of this video. There are a couple of additional things I want to talk about. In my real level that's included with this video, I did a couple of extra things. One of the things I did was placing more meshes. For example, around this edge I placed more meshes. This is a pretty ugly transition, it just cuts off. So I placed one of the wall meshes over the edge like this. And then I also, actually if you go below the water and it's difficult to see things, you can turn off the post-processing inside by clicking this one. And below the water I also mirrored this one down. So I mirrored it down and I placed it, actually I did the wrong one. I placed a lot of these meshes to make a nicer transition from this to the pool. Something I also did was placing lights on top of the water. I tried to simulate light bouncing over the water surface and being scattered around. So I manually faked that basically by adding lights on top of the water with a low brightness, something like this, a bluish color, and a smaller radius, but that's about it. So I place a couple of these lights in a row, and I try to simulate light bouncing off the water surface like that. Another thing I did in my real level was adding fog down here. Gives a bit more sense of depth and sense of scale. What I also did was adding a lot of smaller rocks, because this transition is pretty ugly. For example, like this, it's especially important to keep the rocks small, so you have a good sense of scale, so it looks like it's far off in the distance. So I added a lot of rocks in front of it, in front of the forest, to kind of cover up the ugly start. I also added a lot of rocks further away in the forest or in the middle of the forest, like this, etc., to break up the forest a little bit and add some more rocks here and there. Something like that, to get some variation going on. And I also added a lot of small rocks near the horizon to give, again, more sense of scale and give the idea that the world is bigger than just what you're seeing here. Another trick, by the way, is, for example, I'm down here, camera moves pretty slow. You can speed up the camera by clicking this one, so you can toggle in between with those. It's also possible to set camera bookmarks. So if you position your camera somewhere, for example here, and you press Ctrl 1, and later on you press 1 again, you go back to this position. So you can also do this, for example, Ctrl 2, this is Ctrl 2, I'm flying back here, 1, 2, 1, 2, etc. So that makes it easier to navigate a large level. Let's say you want to continue working on this level, you want to expand it, you want to make it even cooler and even bigger than this. What I would do to expand this level is to build another room behind the building. So what I would do if I want to build a big room inside the building would be to first of all make a big cube. So I would, for example, select this cube and simply duplicate it. And then I would increase its size a lot. Just make a really large cube so you have plenty of space to work in. And rebuilding geometry. a big cube, and then we can select a subtracted brush. So this is a subtracted brush. It's yellow. We're duplicating this one as well. It's being duplicated. I align it, or actually I don't even align it. I place it a bit behind it, a little behind it. Just an example of what I would do. And well, then you can expand it basically. So you can make it bigger. So you have a room inside, and you could do it again if you want to. You can place another room here. Do be careful to stay inside the big blue cube. There we go. And then we can connect it. So I could select this brush for the door and use this brush to make a connection between these two. You can go to top-down view, that's easier. Go in brush edit mode. And we select this row. There we go, going back to 3D. And duplicating it again to make a connection between these two. Selecting the back faces and pulling them out. And rebuilding. And as you can see, I now have a big inside area. It's done very, very fast. I mean, this is really ugly, but you get the idea, I take. And I can now start decorating these. So for example, I can select a couple of meshes. For example, a wall. Adding the walls. Scaling them up a little bit. Etc. Remember that every time you rebuild, you get an error message box thingy. I get this. So every time you rebuild, you get these arrows. In the beginning, I told you to ignore these, but we can take a closer look at these now. First of all, the paths rebuild. Well, we simply don't really have any paths right now. Paths are being rebuilt with this one. And the paths are for RE. So if you have like bots, UT bots, or you have enemies, then the engine has to know where the enemy can walk and where he can't walk, where he can go, where he can't go, etc. So pressing build paths calculates that. And you can see the arrow disappears. We don't really have any paths in this level. I mean, it's a very simple, small level. You can press P if you want to. And if you press P, you can see the paths for the IE. And there's obviously not a lot of paths going on. It simply connects the player start to these items you can pick up, and that's it. I can give a very quick introduction to paths while I'm at it. If you want to add more paths to it, and we want to expand this waypoint network basically, you can add a path node. So you can click somewhere, for example here, right click, add actor, it's off the resolution again, right click, add actor, add path node. And a path node is simply a waypoint for the IE. So if I build paths again, you can see it makes a connection. So what you ideally want to do is cover the entire level with these lines. I can show you inside. So what you ideally want to do is add these path nodes everywhere. I duplicated one and make sure that the bots are able to get from this room to the next one. The next arrow is, well, I need to rebuild the lightning, but that's simple, just rebuild again. I'm not going to do this right now, it takes too much time. The third one, map should have kill Z set. The kill Z is, if you switch to a 2D side view, for example this one, the kill Z is, you have a red line at the bottom. This is the kill Z, and by default it's all the way at the bottom of the grid. And that's what it's complaining about. It complains that it should be manually configured to be somewhere else than at the bottom of the grid. You don't really have to do this. I just ignore this. In our case, it's really not important because you can't actually jump off the level. So what a kill Z actually does is when you pass this line, you will die. So this simply kills everything that passes it. That's it. And it's mainly meant as a backup. For example, you have a large terrain level, but at some point the player does actually manage to get over the terrain and fall off the end of the level, and then he would fall all the way down, and when he passes the line, he will die. So it's like a big, really aggressive way of killing things, basically. We don't really need that in this level. You can never jump down, and you're not supposed to die. So you can just ignore that one. And then we have two real errors. And it says that these two meshes, you can see it's two static mesh actors, they have accept lights on, but they're actually using unlit materials. So the materials are not using lighting, but the mesh is still accepting lights, and that's bad. So we can double click it. We can switch back to a 3D first. And by double clicking it, you can snap to the mesh that gives the problem. You can see it's the water. So the water is accepting lights. I'm turning on allow translucent selection now because I can't select it. The water is accepting lighting even while the material applied to it is unlit. And that's pretty bad. So I selected both planes. I'm going into the properties, static mesh actor, static mesh component, lighting. We disable lighting. So accept lights false, false, accept dynamic lights false, and actually also very important, cast shadows false, because you wouldn't want your water to cast a shadow, obviously. And also something we forgot actually, you go to collision, and you set collide all to no collision. And that's it. You can do refresh. And well, we need to rebuild the pods again. And we have only 2 arrows left, and we can ignore both of these. That's it. One other thing. These are quite large brush surfaces, and you can't even see them. So what you can do is turn off lighting for these. Because the engine is going to calculate lighting and light maps for this, and it will waste a lot of memory. So we can right click them, surface properties, and you can do this. There you go. So you just disable the lighting on these surfaces, on these big surfaces that you can't actually see. Do the same for these, and this, and etc. What you can also do to mass select them is, for example, you want to select all these default textured surfaces. So you can right click one of them, select surfaces, all matching texture, and that will immediately get you all these blue checkered surfaces, 26 of them, and then simply turn off the lighting for all of those. There you go. So that is it for this intro to the UDK training video. I enjoyed making this training video, and I hope you had a good time as well. I hope it inspires you to make many more great creations in the Unreal Engine. Give you a good introduction to the possibilities, to the workflow, how you're building a building like this, how you combine brush with meshes in Unreal, how to make water, etc. So I hope it was an interesting video for you.